And we're live.
We are live, and this is the Freedom Side. Welcome back, everyone, or welcome if this is your first time here. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Perrier, here as always, alongside Rania Kalik. Rania, as always, pleasure to be back with you.
Great to be back on with you too, Eugene. I'm excited for the show.
Yes, you've returned from Iraq, right? You're joining us again from Beirut, Lebanon.
Yes, I am. Hopping back from one country to another. Where will I be next week?
Well, I actually don't know, but that would be fantastic
I don't know either.
if you were just doing musical chairs there. But we'll just get into this show right here. There's obviously quite a bit going on all around the world, and most notably the shock assassination of Haiti, the president of Haiti, so-called president of Haiti. We're absolutely going to be getting into that later in the show. So for anyone you may know who has been talking about Haiti, what's going on in Haiti, wants to know more about what's going on in Haiti, you should let them know to tune into this live stream that we are doing here right now. We're also going to cover a range of different issues, racism in the Olympics. Very, very honored to have Daniel Ellsberg, who released the Pentagon Papers. It's the 50th anniversary of the Pentagon Papers this year. Going to also be joining us later in the show. We're going to be talking about Brazil as well. So there is a full slate of topics to discuss going around the world and touching on many different relevant things, which is a good time to say, if wherever you may be watching, you can take a second to hit that share button and make sure whoever's following you follows us. And if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're not, you can always go to YouTube, make sure that you hit the subscribe button so that you are able to get everything that's coming from our channel. And also make sure you hit that bell so you get the alerts about all the great new content that we are putting out here in Breakthrough News. So on YouTube, hit subscribe, hit that bell, and wherever you may be watching, make sure you hit that share button right now so whoever is watching you can watch us. So,
And
Rania, I also want to note
one
here,
last
we
thing.
continue to be joined as we are every week by Juan in the booth. I don't know, Juan, if he wants to appear yet, but he is here, even though he's not on the screen. Here we go.
There
we
he
go, behind the
is.
glass.
I'm here.
This is like the penalty box. in hockey.
Juan is in a cage. Juan is in a cage because he is symbolizing
Lord.
the struggle of one Britney Spears.
Oh, that's real. That's real. Well, that is a good
that's
place to
right.
start, Rania. I know that you have been fired up about this, as many people have. We have certainly seen the underbelly, if you will, in all seriousness, the underbelly of the conservatorship process in the state of California with Britney Spears. I mean, Rania, maybe just tell us how you're feeling about this whole controversy. I know that her lawyer now, because of the criticism of him basically, it seems, acting against her interest, it seems. Don't sue me, lawyer, whoever you may be. Rania, how is this all striking you here?
I mean, I think a lot of us grew up with Britney Spears,
Indeed.
Really defining our childhood kind of in a way. I mean, she was this big pop star. I certainly grew up hearing all her music and her albums and watching her sort of fall from grace as it was shown in the media. And so it's just been really shocking to see that for the last 13 years, this woman who is this really global icon of pop stardom has been living in this mini police state where the people around her, including her family and her management team, have been just attaching themselves to her like vultures and using her like some sort of factory machine to make them millions and millions of dollars. Well, she has absolutely no rights. It's incredible. And at first when I heard about this story, I was like, she's just some rich celebrity. I think that might be the common, response sometimes, especially from leftists. It's some rich celebrity. But actually this, like you said, it's shown this light on this conservatorship issue where people's families and the people around them can really take advantage of them if they can convince the legal system that they aren't capable of taking care of themselves, to the point where she can't even hire her own lawyers. I mean, of course, there was this piece in the New Yorker, and it made the point that an axe murderer has the right to hire their own lawyer. Britney Spears, for the last 13 years, cannot. Not only can she not, every move she makes is being watched by people. She can't make any decisions on her own. She can't have children if she wants to. She can't have an IUD removed. She can't get married. She can't have friends if her father and the people around her don't approve. She's been going around stealing people's phones and like making phone calls for help for the last 13 years.
That's insane.
And we didn't hear about it. And, you know, the other thing I thought was really interesting about this that is not surprising, but still sort of shocking is she's not the only celebrity who's in one of these arrangements. I don't know if you guys remember Amanda Bynes, but she was really well known. Remember, she was on Nickelodeon, child star, in lots, like featured in lots of movies. And she's also in a conservatorship situation with her parents, and they've completely cut her off from her own estate, her mother, and she doesn't have any money, and she can't do anything with the money she made as a child star. And I think this is honestly, like, at the end of the day, it's really a commentary on capitalism in America right now. I mean, you have a situation where there's these child stars that grow up in this system that really uses and abuses them and makes, and you know, hundreds, if not thousands of people make millions and millions of dollars off of them. And then a part of that process is really allowing the media to kind of like demonize and then eat them alive when they become adults and watch them go through mental health trauma, just the kind of regular things that normal people go through, but in front of a camera, and watch them fall apart and make money off of that. And then just squeeze every last bit out of them that they can. And I was just thinking to myself, you know, if there had been some pop star or some icon in an adversary country that this had happened to, like say, you know, Iran or China, or oh my God, if it was like Venezuela or Cuba, you would be hearing, oh, this is an indictment of socialism. This is an indictment of their system. Look at how awful they treat these people. They live in little mini police states and they have no rights. But why isn't that conversation happening about America? Because this is an actual indictment of our system on like 12 different levels.
Well, it certainly speaks to the old saying that money is the root of all evil. I mean, the thing that really was notable to me about it is since the quote unquote estate or the trust or whatever pays the legal fees of both sides. I mean, really neither side has much influence to do anything other than to sort of keep it going and to be constantly in court and constantly doing these things. And look, it's not that I know all the inside issues. I don't want to accuse her lawyer of something that's not true. But I mean, it does sort of seem that he was going out of its way to just sort of drag out the legal process, not give her the correct legal advice. And he's making something like $400 an hour. From what I read, apparently he's like one of the top lawyers who deals with this kind of thing. And it just sort of felt like, well, wow. So basically both sides are being paid off the money of this third party who has no say in it whatsoever. I mean, it really is notable. And I think the point you make about the Hollywood star system is so true. I mean, I think famously Drew Barrymore is someone who has talked a lot about this as someone who is a child star, you know, who also has faced a lot of challenges. I mean, and there's a lot of jokes. I think we all often joke about this, like how many child stars do you know that have not had some breakdown or some public mental health episode or have ended up in prison or in jail? I mean, it's honestly more, I don't know statistically, but it seems like it's more common than it's not, that if you're a child star, you are, and it's understandable. You know, I think when you look at, and what you're saying is true, Rania. Like, obviously you could argue that many, many people have it worse, but you really take people who have no autonomy, right? Because they're kids, they're thrown into this industry, and at a very young age, they're then exposed in large amounts to many of the worst things that exist in our society. And then, you know, you see the same thing with athletes, you see the same thing with other people, you get all these hangers on and these different pieces, and the whole sort of use them up and throw them out when they're no longer useful to you is big. I mean, even going way back in the day, this was an issue for Shirley Temple as she got older and was unable to really find as many opportunities and things like that. So, I mean, I really do feel as much as, you know, it's become kind of a meme thing, it's become kind of a niche issue, I do think you've hit on something important, Rania, about the way Hollywood works. I mean, obviously it gives people quite a bit of privilege, it gives them quite a bit of money oftentimes, although that's not most people, right? Most people are struggling to make it and doing whatever it can, taking whatever role, no matter how demeaning, just to get on. But you know, the way it's presented to us is almost like the sort of Camelot of America. So it's been interesting on a number of levels.
I mean, there's also a portion of it. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
There's also a portion of it that is definitely like the patriarchy, right? Because if you look at how many like artists, like male artists, have like, you know, had mental breakdowns, have really like lost it in front of like the public, it's been a decent amount. Like, you know, Kanye West, but nobody's taking Kanye.
Yeah,
money.
Shia LaBeouf.
Charlie Sheen.
Yeah,
Shia LaBeouf.
Sheen.
Yeah.
No one's taking his money away and like, taking his
nobody's
rights
taking control
away.
of their money.
Yeah,
Like,
no, I mean, it really is. There's a lot of questions to be raised. And of course, the ultimate question will become, you know, was the legal advice was she not properly advised, which at the last court hearing seemed to be what they were saying, that she could have filed to end this conservatorship and was never told that. And that, you know, could have different implications. And listen, again, I'm not trying to blame anyone about anything, but, you know, some people are unscrupulous.
But it's
Michael
it's
Avenatti,
crazy.
by the way, who's in
It's
court
insane
today being
that-
sentenced for
for
robbing
lack of a
Nike.
better word, but it's definitely like, it makes no sense that because someone has like a mental breakdown, now they can't control like their funds. Like, she's still an artist, right? Like, they still want to
Not
put
just
her
her
in front of
funds.
TV screens. They still want, had a contract with Vegas that she like stepped away from. So she's fine to be like, she's fine to like sing and dance, right? She's fine to be like a media puppet. She's fine to make money for people, but she can't decide what she spends her money on. Like, they've
It's
said
not-
multiple
it's
times she
even
can't
worse
even pick her
than
kitchen
that.
cabinets.
It's even worse than that. I mean, they used her children over her. That's why they've been able to control her all this time and keep her quiet. They kept telling her, we will make sure you cannot see your children if you don't perform. That's disgusting. That is hanging somebody's children over their heads. I mean, there is something to be said here about the labor abuse. And I mean, I know this woman has made millions of dollars, but it's like, it almost doesn't matter. And, you know, one thing that the other thing is she has to not only pay for her father's legal team who's doing this to her, she's also paying for his PR team to try to spin this. But, you know, there's also this constant argument from her father and the management side of things to argue in favor of them keeping their hold over her in this conservatorship, is that, well, when all of this started, she only had $2 million to her name, and now she's worth over $60 million. It doesn't matter. Like, first of all, $2 million is a lot. Second of all, it doesn't matter. So you were able to squeeze $60 million out of her. That makes it okay for you to threaten to take her children away if she doesn't perform like 6 days a week or whatever crazy, insane things they were subjecting her to. And then now, I mean, the thing that really got me the most is she said in that like court hearing that was a couple weeks ago that she has an IUD, which an IUD prevents you from getting pregnant. Yeah. And she wants to have it taken out so she can have children, and they won't let her take it out. Like, she can't even make medical decisions about her reproductive system. That to me is just like, shows how controlling and disgusting this is. And, you know, the media that's now sitting here like, oh my God, free Britney, like, good for you that you care. But all of them played a role. All of these big media outlets played a role in making money off of this woman's downfall. And, you know, if you watch that New York Times documentary, there's these crazy montages that they go back and show you the coverage of Britney Spears when she shaved her head and when she had her kids. And she was clearly, you know, going through like postpartum depression or something,
I mean,
which happens to people.
They were the cause.
They were not only were they the cause, they were talking about her. CNN. There was video clips of Anderson Cooper sitting there being like it was a news story, like Britney Spears seen today with her child in her lap in her car, and what kind of mother is she? And then you see this thing, you know, you see this image of Michael Moore on Anderson Cooper being like, can you guys just leave her alone? Michael Moore just always shows up, voice of reason.
Michael Moore, leave Britney alone.
Well, he has been the voice of reason on a number of things. There's no doubt about that. Well, yeah,
but
no, I hear you. I think
the media should, some self-reflection for the media here.
Well, there's not going to be any self-reflection. I mean, you know, if it bleeds, it leads. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, it's got to be the biggest fiction on earth, and it just, you know, sort of an agreed upon fiction, I guess, that somehow the media is not motivated by money. I mean, you know how anytime anyone says anything about the mainstream media, well, we would never just do it for advertisers. We're never just doing it for the money. The editorial side is totally walled off from the business side. I mean, life does not actually work like that. This is capitalism. People own things. If I own CNN or the New York Times or the Washington Post, now it's one thing if I mainly let you do what you want to do, but does anyone really believe if the owner of these entities or owners, board or whatever, was deeply unhappy with the type of reporting that any of these individuals working at any of these places were doing, that they would still be there? If at the Washington Post they wrote a super critical article about Amazon, and the Amazon PR, like remember the peeing in the bottles thing, and Amazon said that's not true. So if the Washington Post reports that and refuses to report, enough of what Amazon thinks is right in terms of pushback, does anyone think it is not that likely or very likely that like the next day some article will appear in the Washington Post with Amazon's side of it? Like that's how things work, and it's only in the mind of journalists who I think feel deeply insecure about this fact. And I don't think you need to. I mean, this is how businesses work, but I think they feel deeply insecure about the fact that the mythos they say about how they're all, no one's compromised, there's no strings, there's no this, which is obviously not true, are the only people out there who really believe that the news that is produced at individual outlets is not ultimately motivated by profit. I mean, you could say the New York Times, whatever, but they know who reads the New York Times. They do a lot of research on it. Do you think they're going to be approving a bunch of articles that could go up on the front page of Fox News? No, they won't, because the people who subscribe to the New York Times will not pay for that. So at the end of the day, I think, sorry to go on a little screed there, but I agree with you, it should be a lesson learned. But it's like, if it's making money, especially cable news, because people don't even watch cable news. So sensationalistic stuff like that is great for them.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, and you see it, because every time there's a war, they line up behind it in support. Every time there's a bombing, the news is not they're not doing an investigation. They're doing justification for U.S. attacks abroad. So of course.
Exactly.
No, go ahead. Sorry, Juan.
No, so of course. What do you expect from news companies that are owned by the handful of corporations that own all media?
Right.
Would you expect ABC News to be critical about Disney? That's not, it doesn't make sense.
Right.
Yeah.
About Disney, you working children past the amount of time you're supposed to be working them. And
well, I would like someone to do a
pushing them
content
around.
analysis. Maybe someone in our audience can do this. You have to do it over, say, a period of months, maybe starting from the beginning of this year. Yes, I'm giving out homework, Ronnie, that's how I do things, of how many articles that are somewhat critical of Amazon are written in the Washington Post. The reason I'd like to know that is the new editor of the Washington Post, this came up in, when she was coming in, what was her philosophy gonna be? And from what I read, and I think Politico or somewhere, she spoke to this issue and said amongst many of the things that they need to be hitting on, that they should be taking aim at Amazon as well. And I'd be curious to see how that has played out over the first few months. I'd really be curious to see how it has played out over the course of this year. I'm not expecting that much, but they themselves have now set the bar that they will not be in the tank for Jeff Bezos, who, by the way, has stepped down as CEO, I think it was yesterday, and is now just board chair. But either way, I would like to see that, because I think it speaks very, very heavily to the point that we're making. But on that note, we should move to some other outrages here. And I think the Olympics, just the fact that it's even happening in and of itself seems to be a little bit of an outrage given the COVID-19 crisis. Certainly people in Japan seem to think so. Think so. Wow. Maybe we should switch places, Juan. Maybe I need to get behind that glass. I don't know what's going on. I don't even know why that would help, but I'm losing it, guys. I don't know what to say.
It's like a punishment? Are you saying that we're punishing Juan right now?
No, I'm not saying that.
By putting him behind the glass?
Anyway, but obviously there are many controversies around the Olympics all the time, but huge ones in terms of racism, in many different ways. Very happy to be joined as we continue the show here by Jared Ball, who's a professor of communication studies at Morgan State University, also one of the fantastic personalities on Black Power Media, one of my favorite new media collectives. There are people out there saying that there is only one channel, Roland Martin, that's producing daily content, Black News producing daily content. That is false. Black Power Media producing daily content, and it's not just going into one person's pocket, collectively run. Jared, thank you so much for being with us. Oh, you're muted.
My bad. I was just saying free wine.
All right, that's got to go in lower thirds.
Well, Jared, I wanted to start here, obviously, with the controversy around Sha'Carri Richardson, now banned from the Olympics. I mean, not only because of her 1 month ban is she banned from the 100 meter dash, almost at 100 yards there. But from what I understand, she was also not chosen for it by the 4x100 relay. There have been a lot of takes on this. Joe Biden saying, well, the rules are the rules. I've seen a number of people pointing out how it's deeply hypocritical since CBD oil is all allowed and many of these runners who are going to be in the Olympics are promoting it. You know, obviously, this seems like a drastic double standard. Is it possible I could be off base with that, or is that right?
Well, first of all, I just hope that the rules and regulations for guests on Breakthrough News are not as stringent as those for participation in the Olympics.
What does that mean?
I just hope that that's the case, and I appreciate that.
I like where this is going.
Clarify.
I like where this is
I just
going.
want to start there. But I mean, obviously, business, and I mean, first of all, not only did Joe Biden say that, but I just was reading as I was waiting to come on here, unfortunately, that the in many circles, the beloved Dominique Dawes has apparently chimed in and said the same thing.
What?
That she said rules are rules. Yeah.
I'm looking this up right now. What?
She was on with Cuomo on the perfectly legit and above board and whatever Cuomo show or whatever to talk about this. But she apparently said that rules are rules, and then she went on to make an equally absurd comparison, saying that back when she was competing, apparently, and by the way, also to get a shot in on China, that the Chinese had apparently been flouting age restrictions in gymnastics, allowing for young, I don't know. And Dominique says that it made it harder for people competing on her team to make it to the podium. So she's equating, and you all have already pointed out, marijuana is not going to be a performance enhancer, and certainly shouldn't be compared to some alleged, conspiracy to sneak in underage gymnasts. Then it also made me think, so women can't compete for the United States if they smoke marijuana, but they can be allowed to compete or be forced to compete if they suffer what many gymnasts and Dominique Dawes' own colleagues had to suffer at the hands, literally, pun intended, unfortunately, of people running that program. So, I mean, it's like, so women can be battered and abused and go through that and then say, well, get out there and flip and perform. But if you suffer a loss and smoke a joint, well, now you can't be seen as being a legitimate representative of the United States, as if this is what would sully the reputation of this country around the world. So, I mean, it's just, there's so many, anyway, it's just ridiculous.
No, I hear you. And it's like the drug war logic behind it. I was so upset even at her. I mean, I understand why she felt the need to apologize, but I was like, you don't need to justify yourself. I mean, obviously, she was facing a terrible situation. Her mom had just passed. But I mean, I don't care if you were just hanging out. I mean, the idea that somehow, and if we're going to keep talking about Joe Biden, let's let it be known, he said during the campaign trail that he was going to remove marijuana as a Schedule I narcotic, which is totally absurd, has yet to do so. He has unilateral power to do so. But it's like the very fact that marijuana and heroin are both in the same, and this is not to say anything negative. I think obviously we have to look at drug prohibition, period. But it's just like this idea that somehow she had done something really bad or really wrong. It just took me back to like the cartoons in Dare class or whatever in terms of how it's pushed forward. And just how so much of that, despite Jared, how allegedly advanced we are in this question, and allegedly everyone's so woke now and that controls the world, and we're changing everything. We got progressive prosecutors. This young woman who's done nothing wrong is forced to, apologize as if somehow she bulldozed someone's house for no reason.
Well, to me, that was the response of the so-called people in your camp that are saying, you got to think about the next round. You got to think about future endorsements. You got to think about, that's the way initially. Like, why? Of course, she shouldn't apologize. And of course, she shouldn't be made to. First of all, I kept thinking also, I'm sure I'm sure I wanted to say at least half of the people judging her had smoked that morning or earlier that day or were high at the time. Yeah. I mean, the amount of hypocrisy in this is just is really, really trifling and absurd. Or if they weren't smoking weed, they were drinking liquor, popping a pill. maybe messing with the needle. Who knows? There's a lot of bougie, that walk around with these fancy kits. I mean, so there's all kinds of stuff going on, and then they're going to sit in judgment and shut her down, and then find the Dominique Daweses of the world who will co-sign this, as opposed to athletes who should be brought out and reminding folks what these folks are going through, what their lives are really like, and what it takes to get to where she got, and why it shouldn't matter that she did this.
Jared, I'm curious, how much of this do you think is, we talk about leniency or lack thereof, how much of this is related to race and gender?
Well, all of it, well, everything for me is through those lenses and others. And I would add class, because if presented as, some might even argue, not to play too much of this game, but some might even argue if she was a fairer skin, if she had more conventional hair, so to speak, if she didn't have that sort of flamboyant, hoodness about her, and that desire to speak for herself, that upbeat has been called historically. I mean, I think a lot of these things are certainly playing a role in this. And this is why, again, I think, I'm really bothered, and I keep bringing it up, obviously, this Dominique Dawes intervention here, because again, you who better to be able to speak to what this woman has really had to go through, and yet you're going to come out and suggest that she had to follow rules. Obviously, this country is considering not only for the product endorsements that are important to all of this, but just sort of the national branding. They want to be able to send elements of their colonized communities and say, here, look, we have them performing for us too, but only up to a certain point, and certainly within a certain context and in a certain way. So I think all of those things, certainly race, gender, class, her performance, her attitude, so-called, and all of this stuff plays a role in this. And had she been maybe quote unquote well-adjusted in any of those areas, maybe she would have seen a different response. But to me, this is ultimately, and I'll just stop here, I think a great reminder of why I think all of us should sort of reset our relationships to these projects, to these, and I don't mean this in terms of athletes who are brought up from childhood to see this as the pinnacle of their career, but for the rest of us as communities in struggle to say, what is our relationship to all of these events, and why would we want our children representing any of this, and why would we want to participate in supporting any of this? And then now we're being asked to come back and support the Olympics in spite of this, and to support the existing participants, and it's a mess.
No, I think that's such a good point on so many levels. I mean, I've actually been thinking about this quite a bit. People don't know me. I love Olympic track. I love to watch Olympic track, but I'm like legitimately conflicted at this point, because it feels like, well, damn, I mean, if y'all gonna do her like this, what level of, should I give you anything? And it's like, okay, I'm one person, blah, blah, blah. But even just personally, just internally, I just feel like it doesn't even feel right to be doing this. And I mean, it just on top of everything else, and I know I said this in the beginning, the very fact that they're even doing the Olympics in this context, you got the majority of people in Japan don't want it to happen. A lot of questions about COVID-19. Pretty much everyone writing about it is saying that the Prime Minister of Japan is only doing this to hope that nothing bad happens, so that he can then run on it in a snap election and say, oh, look, I did this great job by bringing the Olympics that was canceled last year. So putting out all these people potentially at risk. At the same time, they also want to pump radioactive waste into the Pacific. But not to get too far off the mark, I mean, it really just is, it's a good point about sort of how the Olympics is as a product.
Sorry about that. But one thing I have is being used, I'm certain that it is, and maybe you all can check me on this. To what extent are we seeing, like we've seen historically when these events take place, all of the displacement and the poor and the selection of who are the criminals to be locked up, and is that all happening right now? And is that all being swept under the rug while people are wondering who's getting caught smoking weed and whatever else?
It's got to be. It's got to be.
I mean, I'm
actually not that aware of. I haven't been on top of it as much as I was with Brazil, but it's got to be. There's someone did a book about this. Every single Olympics has included, some form of mass displacement. I mean, obviously, LA in '84 was notorious for that, but Millennium Park in Atlanta, same thing. So it has to be, there are all sorts of scandals flying under the radar, some that didn't fly so much under the radar. There was the guy who was the head of the Olympic Committee who said he didn't want any women in the room because they will talk. I mean, that was basically what it boiled down to. It just, the Olympics. I'm a fan of the Olympics.
Can I switch it up one more time? Can I ask you one more question of all of you? In terms of the labor context, if there is a lockout versus a strike, and some workers are allowed in despite the lockout while others are selectively kept out, what is the role then of the worker? Is it still the same as crossing a picket line? Man, because
theoretically, if there's a lockout and you or a strike, you cross the line, you're a scab.
All right, well, then it's easy for me. Then I'm not watching. Then everybody else should stand in solidarity with her and not go. How about that?
I tell you, if the USA basketball just said, you know what, we're not going to play, she would be in the Olympics. They would just give her the gold medal without even running. I mean, it definitely, without a doubt, the rest, and there's an argument to be made for all Olympic athletes having more labor protections here. And notably enough, it was track out of the University of Oregon under Prefontaine that ended the amateur status of the Olympics. And so there've always been quite a bit of controversy over this labor status of workers, and as these track stars are. And I think that's perhaps important for people to revisit. It's an individualistic sport, but for her to have no real recourse, that was also problematic to me. I was like, so there's no one, you can't take this anywhere? You can't adjudicate this? Like the whole world sounds crazy, and there's just nothing you can do? I mean, it's wild.
It's also insane because I looked up like the Olympics policy on alcohol, and if you're an athlete, you can drink in the Olympic Village. Like you can bring alcohol as long as you do it in your own private room. Like, so she did it in a state where it was legal, right? So she didn't break any laws. And the only reason that that weed is being held at something that can disqualify her is really the war on drugs. Like we can't, there's literally no other reason. Weed is not a performance enhancing drug. I've seen a lot of memes talking about they should take a couple seconds off because she was running with weed lungs. Like that's not the reality, but like I know a couple people and they can't run as fast as she can. She's here breaking records, like setting up. Like I do want to show a clip of right after well, I'll show two clips real quick. One of is of her running.
Who's going to Tokyo? We're about to find out. Women's 100 is underway. JVN Oliver, a fantastic start. She's putting the pressure on Richardson. Here comes Sha'Carri. Richardson's going to Tokyo.
Damn, she smoked everybody.
Smoked them.
She must have.
Pun intended, I guess.
It's about 6-7 strides behind out of the gate. Woo!
And then I want to show, like, right after this, she had an interview where she spoke about her biological mother dying.
My family has kept me grounded. This year has been crazy for me. Going from just last week, losing my biological mother, and I'm still here.
What did you say? You lost your mother?
Yeah. I'm still here. Last week, finding out my biological mother passed away, and still choosing to pursue my dreams, still coming out here, still making sure to make the family that I do still have on this earth proud. And the fact that nobody knows what I go through. Everybody has struggles, and I understand that. But y'all see me on this track, and y'all see the poker face I put on, but nobody but them and my coach know what I go through on a day-to-day basis, and I'm highly grateful for them. Without them, there would be no me. Without my grandmother, there would be no Sha'Carri Richardson.
But yeah, like the fact that she lost her biological mother a week prior, you know, and she did an interview with Good Morning, I think Good Morning Today, where she spoke about like where that's where she had apologized, and she had said something that like was really heartbreaking. She was like she had to be in front of TV, she had to be in front of the limelight, she still had to run, she couldn't hide herself, so she tried to hide her feelings. Like that is insane, and it goes back to the conversation we were having before about like even about Britney. The way that people that are in the limelight are held to a certain they're held to certain standards that are not realistic for people, because at the end of the day, she's like she's a person. Mm-hmm. She's fast as hell, but she's a person, and like she's going through trauma. Like if this was anybody else, like
Yeah. Well, Naomi Osaka, I mean, raised a similar issue, right, in terms of the tennis issue, the French Open, and the media, the way they treat people, and the way you're sort of expected to perform, you know, in front of these interviews, which, I don't know, I think anyone who's a sports fan knows. I've never felt there's a lot of value to these post-game interviews anyway, right? They just make you stand up there and say a few things. Everyone pretty much says the same thing. No one's ever going to really say anything terribly controversial because, you know, your endorsements or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Well, I guess Cristiano Ronaldo with the Coke thing. But, you know.
That was hilarious.
That was fantastic, I have to say. But only someone of that caliber could dare to slight Coke like that. Any slightly smaller player, it could have ruined your entire career to do that. So you have to be at the pinnacle of international sports stardom to make a point that is obviously true, that soda companies are basically like drug dealers. But that's the other side of it, Jared, is we're out here talking about weed, but, you know, what is big sugar as an industry? And I'm not saying I don't like a sugary drink, but the reality is, I always say, people say, how did America come up? Drug dealing. I mean, the Virginia colony was not viable until they were like, we're gonna sell tobacco and get people high. Oh, wait a second, we about to get some sugar out here. I mean, they just addicted people to drugs, but they've become normalized in, you know, the fake food pyramid is okay.
No, you're right. I mean, that is funny. First of all, I can't help but all the contradictions. I'm thinking about the journalist that put the microphone in her face, and thinking about the gaggle of journalists. It's like when journalists or even academics gather at these conferences, or when they're off mic and off the record. I mean, it's debauchery. So and then they clean themselves up and run out there and stick a mic in someone's face and condemn them if they haven't, you know, comported themselves with the fake, you know, standards that are being applied. I mean, it's maddening. But again, I think if we use it as I think you've just done to pull back the veneer on what's really going on here, that if you can pump sugar, when Anthony Bourdain, you know, I remember one thing he said before he died was that he said when he thinks about the world that would allow for the imposition of processed foods, it would drive him into deep depression. I mean, if you think about the idea of what's behind a Coca-Cola, you know, before you get to the liquid in the bottle, you know, they've already been condemned for labor practices, supporting, I mean, people being killed in their bottling plants. I mean, it's all never mind the health imposition, you know, stealing water for their water. I mean, all kinds of shady stuff that goes on. And then we get to the sugary. And of course we like it, the same reason why cocaine is of a drug. People do smoke marijuana. The drugs work. The sugar works. The cheese works. I mean, all of these things hit us like heroin. You know, I mean, it's crazy. So of course people are gonna, and then when when they're oppressed and suppressed and suffering and going through, you know, trauma, they're gonna go and revisit them. And then here comes the Olympics to punish them for it. I mean, it's crazy. And then we're gonna be asked for a gold medal. And when the U.S. starts calculating their summer medal totals, we're supposed to. Man, I can't get with it. No offense to the personal
America's
athletes,
back.
but
we got a lot of gold medals. No masks, no gold. We just gold medals. Get the masks off. Get back in the club. Watch the movies. We're coming back. Shots in arms, as Biden said. Shots in arms.
Oh man.
No, but
wow.
The rules are the rules thing that Biden said. It sounds like very much like China has to comply because the rule of law and order, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what that sounds like to me. It's like who like.
Well, what is it that Malcolm X said? You can tell me, Jared. We know what he means when he says white. He means I'm boss.
Boss.
That's how I felt when I heard Biden just kind of ambling over from wherever, you know, like it looked like he was in the Cracker Barrel gift shop, just ambling over, talking about the rules are the rules.
I mean, look, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. It's a good thing that logic doesn't apply to his son.
I'm about to say that. He got to say that to Hunter.
Yo,
if somebody need to hear the rules of the rules, it's Hunter.
Right?
I mean, it's crazy. You know, I have to say, you know, I like Mark Lamont Hill. You know, I'm a fan of Mark. But I was definitely upset with him when he did a little monologue about Republicans saying, why does no one care about Hunter Biden? He's like, because it's Hunter Biden, who cares? I was reading some of what this dude was saying. Some of these racist texts and other, they should make a bigger deal out of this. You're telling me that this is just a A dude who's making millions of dollars off of his father, no skills at all, like the worst of America.
Right.
And then he's in all of his private things saying racist stuff about black people, racist stuff about Asian women. I do want to see people make a big deal out of that. I
That's
do
American
think
values,
Biden should have to answer for that. You can't be up here talking about, oh, my family is so great, da-da-da-da-da, and I'm going to be against racism, I'm for Black Lives Matter, blah, 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 I'm going to heal the country, and your son seems to be extremely comfortable with racism. I would like to know what you make of that contradiction. But you know.
And again, the rules don't apply to his son. Like, how come Joe Biden's not telling his son, hey, Hunter, the rules are the rules? It's like, it's this logic only applies. I mean, it's so emblematic of America.
Yeah, it is.
Rich
That's still, I have to say,
white
is
boy
like,
can get away with whatever he wants, but you know.
He really can get away.
Black girl
His story of the
mother
Navy is still one of
the
the best stories I've ever heard. That he just went out of the bar and was smoking a cigarette with the guy, and then as he was driving home realized that it wasn't just a cigarette, that perhaps there'd been some cocaine in there, and he just accidentally tested positive the next day, and the Navy was actually wrong for kicking him out. And I was like, does anyone believe that? Really?
I mean,
But they put him on stage at the
accidentally
DNC. They
so
gave him more
radical.
time than Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at the DNC.
Hey, look,
and she's an elected Democratic
when I was
official.
in the Navy, when I was in the Navy and my number came up to drop by the urinalysis test, I started coming up with those stories too. I had them all already too. I didn't know what was in the cigarette, boss. I didn't know what was. It was just the best cigarette I ever smoked in my life. It was crazy good, and I just put it with,
People just be praying on it like that.
I mean, I get it. I mean, but that's, and look, to both of your points. I mean, all three of your points. When the hypocrisy of he'll drag Hunter's experience, or I mean, Bo's experience. He'll drag the death of his one son, right, when necessary, but then put the living one, safely in a corner and say, no, don't focus on what my living one is doing. Focus on what my dead one is doing, or what isn't doing, so that I can use his death for my own career.
Everybody has a favorite son. Everybody has a favorite son.
Well, we're going to leave it there.
Damn.
I just want to watch. All I'm going to say is
pushing
this.
it. Thank you, Juan. Free
Juan's
Juan.
got some-
Free
Juan's got
Juan.
some
If you're watching on
feelings out.
YouTube or anywhere, check out Black Power Media. A bunch of great shows, including the Remix Morning Show, which is extremely funny, I just have to say. Jared, hey, really appreciate you, as always, joining us here on Breakthrough News.
No, it's always a pleasure. Renai, it's good to catch up with you as well. Juan, good luck behind that glass, my man. Peace, everybody.
Oh, woo, let me just take a
break
deep
Juan
breath
out.
here.
Gotta
Well, no, we don't.
someone's gotta
Well,
bring an axe.
let me just say, for those who are watching on television, I'm in the same general area as Juan. The door is open.
Help.
He can leave at any time. There is no one being held captive here.
Please
We don't
help.
do that. Oh, okay. I want to turn to a serious
I don't
story,
know what to
but
do.
let me just take a deep breath.
I feel very big. Yeah, big contradictions here. Okay, Juan's okay, guys. Juan's okay.
He's definitely well.
I think.
He's not held captive. Is he okay? That much. He's not in eyesight of me. Like I can see him, but yeah, I can't fully see.
Gonna have
No,
faith.
Juan's okay.
All right, now to the series. I gotta
Doing a great job.
Because now we're about to talk
it's
about some
okay.
heavy stuff.
We were serious. It's
Yeah.
important to be serious. But I do want to turn to something that is not only serious, but very, very important. And that is what has been going on in the country of Brazil. Now, of course, almost certainly, if you're watching the news, you have heard that the COVID-19 crisis is very bad there. But what you probably have not heard is that the popular movement in Brazil has been out in the streets in a big way, addressing many of the issues that have arisen from President Bolsonaro's, just genocidal approach to COVID, among other things. So we are very honored to be joined here as we continue the show by Ana Júlia Guedes, who is a lawyer and a militant of Levante Popular. Ana, thank you so much for being with us here on the show.
Thank you so much. Oh, let me adjust this camera. All right.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hello,
really,
you guys.
really thank you for
Thank you
joining.
very
I
much for the
appreciate it.
invitation.
So maybe for people who don't know, Ana, talk a little bit about the protests that happened this past weekend and about the Fora Bolsonaro movement, what people are demanding and hoping to see.
Well, actually, the Get Out Bolsonaro is a movement that has been growing since he was elected, actually, because the biggest part, a big left, the entire left wing knows it, but a big part of population also knew that he was this kind of career political who was famous to do absolutely nothing. He was a congressman for 28 years who presented like two or three law projects and did absolutely nothing through his entire political life. But he has a big, he created a big power of to say that he was against the system, etc. But his entire government has been a long, very long and sad, contradictory and disastrous moment of our country. And the COVID pandemic and the whole crisis here has become something that we don't know when we're going to get out of this. And the Get Out Bolsonaro asks for really, really basic rights. We are talking about the access of water, we're talking about the access of food, and the hunger in our country has gone back to levels that we had come across 20 years ago, and we're back like as if nothing had happened in this entire century. And as part of the popular organizations, and to make the translation, I am my organization is called Youth Popular Rising, and we are when the entire last year since 2020, the beginning of the pandemic, we have been making campaigns, solidarity campaigns to make sure people have access to food, have access to hygiene items, and to talk to people about what's the level of this crisis we're living. But to be honest, right now, after over 500,000 deaths, the Brazilian has got to its limit, and we couldn't send, and we got back to the streets by popular demand. We are back to talk to people. We want to show that this is the situation we're living in. This is not the only way to live. This is not the only way to deal with the pandemics. We're still facing huge problems with vaccination. There have been a recent investigation that has shown that Bolsonaro might be involved in a scheme to make money out of vaccines. So he's like trying to become millionaire with fucking vaccines, man. Like we have 2,000, almost 2,000 Brazilians dying every day until now, and with the vaccines going on. So it's very frustrating to lose people you love, to lose people you know, to lose people you work with, because the president is too busy trying to make money out of the goddamn vaccines. So we have started the movement. It's been almost a month now, and the last week we had the third protest, and it's been quite revigorating to get back on the streets, get back to talk to the population, and to make sure our message is getting further and further.
No, please, Ronnie, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you, Anna, amidst all this, we see that Lula will be apparently running in elections again and is polling quite high. And we saw Bolsonaro make this announcement that he would not relinquish the presidency during the 2022 election in the event of what he called election fraud. And of course, this is a disturbing thing to hear him say, considering that the idea of election fraud was the pretext for the coup in Bolivia. It's now being used in Peru to deny the left candidate's victory or hold it off at least for a time and overturn it. And we've seen it, of course, used again and again by the OAS across the region. This also coincided with a visit from the head of the CIA to Brazil. Of course, we don't know what the content of that meeting was about. Bolsonaro implied it was about pushing back against this new pink tide, which we see, not happening it's happening not only in Brazil, but also in Colombia and Chile. So what do you make of this? What do you make of Bolsonaro saying, invoking the idea of he won't step down in the case of so-called election fraud?
Well, you see, it's almost I can't even say what is the feeling to hear the president of the country saying that Brazil's democracy is quite young, as many other Latin American countries. Our democracy is has just turned 30 years old. And when you hear that, it's clear that he knows he's running a very high risk of losing elections, because Lula represents a message of hope, represents a message of getting out of this economical and social crisis in a way that makes Brazilian lives better. And you see, for instance, this the CIA visit here has how it has been demonstrated and showed. We see that he had visited especially the army, the armed forces authorities. So it's like it's a major. It's like twice worse. If he was only visiting Bolsonaro, who is this completely uh, clown, but terrible clown president. But if that was a visit, that would be terrible. But to visit the armed forces in a country who had just come out of a dictatorship from the armed forces less than 35 years ago, it's extremely dangerous, and gets our attention, and it makes sure to us, it makes clear to us actually that we need to talk to the population. We need to show them that there are people struggling, there are people doing what they can do to make sure that our lives get better, and to step aside, because we know, like we have learned from Bolivia, we are learning with Chile, that only masses of people can make sure the democracy lives in our continent. The democracy can wins, and we can have a life of self-determination. So it's really worried. We are really concerned at what it's going to mean, because in our story, our history is quite. It gets really it's a repetition of our history when goddamn CIA president comes by to make a visit again. The next time it didn't end well. It took us 25 years to get out of it. So and we lost I don't know how many lives. So I guess it's very concerning, and it makes clear to us that the only way we get out of this is to make this protest, and to make sure that our voice get echoed and shows up everywhere. And there's something that I want to say that is very important, that I think it marks and it gives the tone of what we're living. These protests have begun this year after the 13th May, where we had a protest against a massacre that had happened in Jacarezinho here, where 25 people were killed, were murdered by the police in a police invasion on the, I don't know how you call that, favela.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, there was big protests in Rio de Janeiro, in São Paulo, to denounce that, and in my city too, but to denounce what was happening during the COVID pandemic. Police was still murdering people on the street without absolutely any justification or and outside all of our laws. And since then, people had remembered the importance of being and the possibility, and we have been trying, keeping all the possible security measures to that, because there's a very important teaching that, to make a protest where you can respect distancing, where you can respect protection, where you wear a mask, and at the same time you say what's going on in the country. So it's a very crucial moment in our politics, and all of our structural problems are revealed. The Jacarezinho massacre has revealed once again what is the part that the police takes in our country. The hunger levels, the death numbers show what our elite is concerned about. So it's a very crucial moment to us. It's like, as a left-wing organization, you think militant, you think this is the moment to what we prepare to our entire life. This is what we talk. The moment where everything, all the contradictions will be shown down. You have to go there and act and talk to the population. But goddamn, definitely a challenge, and it's definitely the most important moment. I think to our generation, for instance, it's definitely the most important moment so far. To struggle for democracy and for dignity, and at the same time to talk about values that are forgotten, like solidarity, like the respect, and I mean, I could go on here saying the
No, no,
signs
no.
of revolution.
I'm with you. I'm with you. You want me? I want to go out on the streets. Hearing that, but I think you're right, and I'm glad you raised the generational point and the point of young people and of youth, because it does feel like an inflection point in Brazil. I think we feel it here in the United States that, for those of us who are looking and we have 30, 40, 50 years ahead of us, capitalism is just not sustainable. And it feels like words like socialism, critiques of capitalism are so much more on the lips of young people because they know we have to have a different system to succeed. At least that's what we're seeing here in the United States. I assume it's what's happening in Brazil as well.
Yeah, it's a very it's like a portrait of this kind of moment. It's such a terrible moment and such a savage moment for capitalism. When you see socialism becomes once again a hope, becomes once again a dream, becomes a subject you can talk to people. Of course, that not like we don't do like, oh my God, socialism now, can't hear it, everything. It's like, what socialism is? Vaccines and dignity and respect and education and like respect, environmental respect. And all this message looks like something that makes people's eyes shine again. And, the will to struggle for something. To me, it's a very crazy thing because when I started as a militant, it's been about, as a very young age, but it's about 10 years. When we had a better life condition, maybe socialism was like, oh, but this is not socialism. It's like way too different. It's not exactly. But now, when we see what capitalism do to us, what capitalism really is, because it's like capitalism Jews here, like Latin America drinking a very sour capitalism juice is what's happening here. Like it's you were talking about the politics sons and daughters being completely out of control. Well, you see here, it's amazing. What Bolsonaro did is like record breaking. Honestly, the guy has like 4 kids, and his 4 kids, 4 male kids, 4 sons, and his 4 sons are involved in corruption scandals. All of them. From the youngest one, who I think is it's about 20, to the oldest one, who is a senator. They're all involved in every levels. Like one of them is involved with drug trafficking militias, and all of them actually. But one is especially involved, and the other is involved with influence trafficking. Making like favors because he's the son of the president. It's a gigantic, terrible mess, and this shows that there is no way out for us here. There is no midway. For Latin Americans, we have absolutely no midway. We only have socialism as the way to be actually free and to actually talk to our roots, talk to who we actually are, and to break these structural columns that make our system extremely cruel. So it's really crazy to dream about socialism and wake up to Bolsonaro's. It's a thing.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Well, let me ask you this finally, and maybe I already know the answer to this question, but I'm curious to hear it anymore. Should we expect more in terms of the street movement and the popular movement in Brazil coming out in the coming weeks?
Yes. I think we are going to. We're getting creative also. Like the next Monday, the 13th, we're going to make a big national mobilization, but not exactly to make the protests only, but to also make sure we're all the bus stops, on the substations, on door to door in the neighborhoods, to talk to people, to present what we're talking about. All the organization, it's been a very rich unity moment to all, the entire left wing. So we have to enjoy this moment to talk about what is going on, because besides all this, the whole pandemic what the pandemic would do, and it is doing to our country. We also have the president trying to, sell out our state-owned enterprises. It's really a huge mess. And we are expecting not only to grow in numbers, but to grow in diversity, to get further into the countryside, to get to the smaller towns, to the people whose cities haven't even got COVID so far, but we need to talk about what is going on, because food is not getting anywhere, energy is not getting anywhere, and water is not getting anywhere. So we need to get to every little house, every corner, and we're projecting ourselves, we're planning, we're hoping we are going to get to everyone's houses and hearts with a message that it needs to be different, that is going to be different, because this threats Bolsonaro does, like, I'm not going to accept any result, that shows that the elections in 2022 are not going to solve the massive and deep problems we have got until so far. So we have to, as popular organizations, the only thing we have and our biggest richness is people's minds, is people's hearts, arms, souls, hugs, and that is all we need right now. And we need to be in every house to talk about them, to talk about what is going on. So even if we are sure something is going to happen too, the bigger is our reach, the bigger is going to get the response from those who do not want us to grow. So we don't know what is going to come against our forces and our protests and our organizations, but we are sure that we are going to plan ourselves and to create groups. And we're doing it for already our entire political lives, but especially the solidarity campaign since last year. But we're going to deepen it every day because we have to blossom again. And I don't know how it's going to get out. I have no idea. Our conjecture here has shown that there is no limits to reality. Everything can happen, but we're going to make sure that our days and nights are dedicated to grow this movement, to deepen it, and to make it even more broad and with even more subjects and people,
Well, Anna, we really appreciate you giving us some time here, letting folks know what's going on there in Brazil. We will continue to watch, continue to support. Thanks again for being with us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really happy here to bring this message and to show the world. And I forgot to say something. The Black Lives Matter protests in the United States were crucial to put us again on the streets, to make us believe that the entire working class is united and is thinking about a new tomorrow and a new entire world. So I have to say that the people from the United States have made a lot to wake us up in this moment, and I hope we give you the message, and I really hope we get the support and share everything you see and demonstrate to the entire world that this man is going to be defeated by the forces of the popular people, the popular organizations, and the working class.
Right on, right on. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, if you are just joining us, this is the Freedom Side here on Breakthrough News. I'm Eugene Puryear, and there is Rania Khalek, my co-host. And we are going to advance the agenda here, and we want to turn to a very, very important issue, and that's the issue of Haiti. And I just want to say, now's a great time, if you haven't already, to hit that share button wherever you are watching so that whoever is following you can follow us, because obviously this is, rightfully so, one of the more important stories in the world, and the popular movement that's been shaking Haiti for months now, I think, has really caught our eye here at Breakthrough News, and I think many thousands of people in the United States, and certainly what happens in Haiti has a lot of repercussions for the world. So turning to that, we are very honored to have with us here on the show Chris Bernadel, who is a member of the Haiti Committee of the Black Alliance for Peace. Shout out to BAP. Also joined by Jemima Pierre, who is an associate professor of African American Studies and Anthropology at UCLA, and also with the Black Alliance for Peace. So Breakthrough and BAP linking up here on Haiti. Chris, Jemima, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, the pleasure is all ours. Jemima, I'll start with you. And this is obviously a fast-moving situation. There's a lot happening there. One of the things that has been notable to me is this shootout that happened, the killing of the alleged assassins. And to me, it just seems so indicative of everything, that they're like, yeah, these are these mercenaries who are coming in. We don't know who they are. And then allegedly they find them and they end up dead. And we still don't know. I mean, the level of dissembling from the so-called government in Haiti is notable. I'm curious what you think about this interim government, what it represents, and what it means, the state of emergency they've put in.
Okay, that's a lot. But yes, the interim government is not an interim government. It's illegitimate the same way that the government before it was illegitimate. So that we have to start with that, right? That what's fascinating, and people have been talking about, is the fact that the guy Claude Joseph, who declared himself president, was supposed to step down on the day that he declared himself president, because he was going to be replaced by a Dr. Ariel Henry, who was actually Moïse was forced by the OAS to actually name a new prime minister. And so this guy was an interim prime minister from April, Claude Joseph, from April until the day before yesterday. And sure enough, Moïse gets assassinated on the night, and he declares himself president. And then all of a sudden, he declared a state of siege, which is like martial law. And we have to be very worried about that, because what that means is airports are closed, military tribunals instead of regular courts, protests are frowned upon, and so on. And I don't know if you all have been on air, but just a few minutes ago, the United Nations are, what I call our white rulers of Haiti. The United Nations office has affirmed his assertion that he will lead the country, and then we'll hold it until, we'll lead it until these elections in September 26th, which actually already goes against the Constitution, because even if you have an interim president, it's only a 90-day, you have 90 days to start the elections. And so Haiti, the situation is really terrible and untenable, and I'm not sure it would actually quiet the masses of people who've been asking for, Moïse to step down and for a return of sovereignty and democracy. And so this is where we are, and the international community, which are the UN, the core group, the OAS, that run Haiti, that makes a decision. I think, they knew there's nothing that happens in Haiti without them knowing. So we have to also question their position in this and how they're quickly jumping on the Claude Joseph bandwagon.
No,
I can go on, but this is, a good opening salvo for us to really talk about what's going on in Haiti.
No, I think that's so important. And thank you for that UN news. I mean, people who watch Breakthrough know I had the pleasure of being in Haiti for 8 days at the end of March and early April. And you couldn't find anyone, no matter where you went, no matter who you talked to, who thought that the referendum or the September elections were in any way legitimate. And so to see the so-called United Nations speaking, disgusting on so many levels. Chris, let me ask you this, and I think it speaks very much to what Jemima was laying out with the UN there. I mean, what level of concern should we have about U.S. intervention? I mean, they're obviously intervening all day, every day, but, troops on the ground, boots on the ground from the U.S. I know Colombia has called for OAS intervention. I mean, is this something people should be watching for, expecting that could happen?
Yes, I would say so. Allies of the Haitian people have to remain vigilant, because if you look at our history, or the history of the Haitian people, the last time we had a president assassinated and the political turmoil that followed it, the U.S. used it as a pretext to invade the country, raid the treasury, force the Constitution to be rewritten, and to occupy the country for 19 years, from 1915 to 1934. A lot of what we're seeing now with these, what people are saying are plots and different things, can represent, something that's plagued Haiti throughout its history also, which is splits amongst the Haitian ruling class, splits amongst Haiti's comprador bourgeoisie that's been placed in charge of Haiti by its neo-colonial masters, the US, the UN core group, the OAS. So what we're seeing now, with this prime minister, now president, or de facto president, Claude Joseph, could be a representation of that playing out again.
I think that's a very good point. And Jemima, I'm curious what you think about that. I mean, obviously, we can only speculate but so much, but I think you laid out the sequence of events very well about this so-called president supposed to be gone, declares himself president in the wake of this. I mean, does it feel like the assassination of Jovenel was sort of a no honor amongst thieves kind of situation?
Yes, I mean, it's starting to, we're all speculating, so let's just be clear here, but it is starting to seem like it was an inside job or some kind of internal dissent or dissension within that group. And some people are even calling it a coup because it's like one wing of the party going against the other because they might not want that. And so we have to be very careful about the speculation, but it does seem that way. I wanted to just quickly say, though, about intervention is that, and I'm sure you all have covered this already. There is already a foreign presence in Haiti. Haiti is under occupation. And Haiti has been under occupation since 2004 when the US, Canada, and France came in, took out our president and flew him to Africa and then sent all these troops and then convinced the United Nations Security Council to send an occupation force, which is still there, which is the same UN occupation force, even though the numbers have diminished since 1919, they removed a lot of the military there. But there's a UN force, political office, integrated office that controls the narrative, that controls what happens. And that's the office that declared today that this is our president. And so intervention would mean, I guess, more military and more political interference. But the truth is they control Haiti, and they have controlled Haiti. And I think that's an important thing for us to remember, because nothing happens there under occupation without their knowledge.
No, I think that's an extraordinarily important point. When I was there on Constitution Day, the same morning of the big protest, the national police were in the U.S. Embassy meeting with them about the security of the country. And it was just, if it wasn't so deadly serious, it would be laughable, but it is so deadly serious. And I think, Chris, that's one of the things that I think is deeply important about all of this is the level of repression that has been visited on the popular movement of Haiti has been massive. And of course, every news agency on earth is now talking about Haiti. But, when we were there just a few months ago, it was like a conspiracy of silence, at least here in the United States, about these brutal massacres of protesters.
Yes, massacres of protesters have been a common occurrence, even more so in these last few months. But even going back to the Petro-Caribe protests that began against Jovenel Moïse soon after he came into office, this has been commonplace. And the people of Haiti are being held hostage even still to this day and don't feel safe taking the streets because of the fact that massacres occur and these gangs are allowed to roam the streets and attack people with apparent impunity.
It certainly seemed apparent. When we were there in Bel Air, it was, the stories people were telling us were, people being burned and stabbed and shot and houses burned down. And it was notable. Rania, I see you trying to get in there, but point well taken.
Oh, no. I'm just, all three of you know so much about Haiti. And I'm curious, and I kind of open this to all of you, including you, Eugene, because all we can do is speculate. But since this assassination happened, the question is who benefits? So I'd like to hear from you guys, from your vantage point, who benefits? Doesn't mean they did it, but, it does maybe point in a certain direction. Who benefits from this assassination, and what does it mean for these protests that were taking place in the aftermath of this?
Jemima, why don't you start?
Yeah, well, okay, let's start with who doesn't benefit, and that's the Haitian people and Haitian sovereignty. So that, get that out of the way. But, who benefits besides, the interim prime minister, now president, and his people, but really the so-called international community, the US, the UN, the OAS, and out of that, the core group. Because Moïse was increasingly sidelined and was so difficult to deal with because there's so much hatred of his policies, of him. The violence around him was so great. Just last weekend, 19 people were murdered in Delma 32, right? In one day, and the U.S. government said nothing. And it was just really fascinating. So part of that is Moïse might have been too much for them to push for what they want. And this guy, Claude Joseph, what I'm finding out is that he's been around for a while. He has a PhD from a university in the US. He's been working funded through the National Endowment for Democracy. We know that's not about democracy. And so he has a long history with the US. And so we have to think about, well, was he the one that they've decided would replace Moïse to continue the process of controlling Haiti? But controlling Haiti for very specific things, because we also have to worry about the narratives that are starting to spin, right? So on the one hand, you have these mercenaries, but then they're speaking Spanish and people are trying to link them to Venezuela, right? So then you have the former corrupt Prime Minister Levante saying, these are Venezuelan nationals. So we have to think about what this means for the U.S. and the UN and the OAS to have control of Haiti, what it means then for like broader U.S. foreign policy, OAS, right-wing policy in the Western Hemisphere, and then of course U.S. having access to the Panama Canal, to Asia, right? And so there is a really important geopolitical strategy here that we have to really focus on, and how Haiti then becomes central to that for these Western powers.
Mm-hmm. Chris, your thoughts?
Well, yes, I agree with Jemima. The Haitian people are not gaining anything from this situation, and it seems to be just another pretext for the U.S. and the other imperial forces, the OAS, the core group, to increase their influence over the political situation, the political process of Haiti. And with Claude Joseph staying on until these elections, like Jemima mentioned at the beginning, this new administration, or this new form of the administration, is just as illegitimate as the whole Jovenel Moïse administration was 2 days ago. So that hasn't changed at all. And there hasn't been anything that's shown that they are committed to increasing the Haitian people's input, the Haitian people's control over this process of transition that the Haitian people have been calling for. They've been calling for a people's transition, a transition where the civil society, the masses of Haitian people can take part and control the process. And that's not what's been going on. The United States, the UN, core group, OAS, has been supporting the PHTK regime and are going to continue to support through Claude Joseph this neo-colonial system that they've imposed on Haiti.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I certainly can't add anything analytically. Jemima, go ahead.
No, and I have to say, the thing about what will determine intervention, like more military, is how Haitian people respond to this, right? So with the state of siege, protests are going to be completely curtailed, right? And we don't know how long the state of siege will go, but it also means that if the UN is basically our masters, are telling us that we have till September 26th, if people start protesting, they're going to use that as a pretext for bringing military reinforcement to uphold Claude Joseph. And that's what we have to worry about, and we have to be concerned about for the Haitian people.
No, that's so important. I remember when we were there, we got like an alert on our phone from the U.S. Embassy that was like, there are protests happening in Haiti. Don't go out into the streets. The protests I'm trying to remember exactly what they said. It was like they can take a rapid turn to aggressive violence. Or you really would have thought it was the worst situation you were ever walking into. And it was, again, it's one of those things, if it wasn't so deadly serious, it'd be funny, because then you're there in the middle of the protest, and it's just the exact opposite in every possible way, in terms of who was there, why people was there, the feelings, everything about it. But the U.S. has so much discursive power. And so you can already see how the ability of the U.S. Embassy to just criminalize protests that easy to all Americans in the country for whatever they may be, and how that can be carried and misconstrued. And I think that's the only other thing I would just slightly say, I think, for people watching in the U.S. that I think is often lost because of just the racism and the coverage of Haiti, is that Haiti is a geostrategically important country. And it's never presented that way, but a huge amount of wealth is being extracted from Haiti, the geopolitical issues in terms of its location as an island. And, you know, I'll throw another one in there, big supporters of Taiwan. And there aren't that many supporters of Taiwan anywhere in the world anymore. So that has a lot of value, I think, to the United States as well. And you know, maybe my follow-up question on that very note is, I'm curious both your thoughts about this, and certainly Jemima, I'll start with you. I mean, what should people be expecting from the popular movement? Should they be expecting to see things continue? Again, we're just speculating, but certainly it's been shaking the whole country for months now. I mean, does it seem like this could quell it, or that people will continue to come out and make their mark?
I think people will continue to come out and make their mark. I think, you know, I mean, that's been Haiti for 217 years, right? So, you know, it's been a struggle. It's been a long struggle. And I think this guy was even more illegitimate because, you know, he was like, he's the fifth prime minister assigned by Moïse. And people know this. And so he still represents the Moïse government. And I think part of that is going to be how much repression they're allowed to get away with. But I don't think people will stop it because people think the elections are illegitimate, the electoral council is illegitimate, the government is illegitimate, and the UN is illegitimate, right? Because one of the things that we have to remember is that in March, the protests were not just about Moïse, they were about the imperial meddling in Haiti. You know, all the signs where UN get out, you know, US leave us alone, the US is racist. And so I think people are going to protest, and people know what's going on. And they hate that woman, Helen Laline, who's in charge of the UN, and they've said that. And so I'm just hoping that we don't have as many deaths and massacres as we've had before, in the past 2 years, because, people are not going to sit taking this.
Mm-hmm. A quick bit of news that was just sent to me here relevant to this. I guess one of the people allegedly the suspect in the assassination seems to be a U.S. citizen. Washington Post reporting that. We'll see that. Well, Chris, I'm curious your thoughts as well about maybe some of what people may expect. And I'll add another wrinkle to it as well. You all in Black Alliance for Peace have been mobilizing, alongside the popular movement in Haiti for a number of months. What are some of the connections that you see as well, Chris, between the popular struggles here in the United States and the popular struggles in Haiti?
There are definitely connections, and the Haitian people, grassroots organizations, they see those connections as well. Right now, because the situation is so tumultuous and everything is changing minute by minute pretty much, as well as this state of martial law pretty much that has been imposed on the country, it is, I believe, going to be very, a dangerous situation on the streets. But the Haitian people have always been courageous. They have always led us here in this hemisphere in taking action against imperialism, and they're going to step up and they're going to, struggle against this. It's our responsibility here to support them and to, highlight everything that they're doing and try to coordinate our actions along with theirs. With the Black Rebellion that was been taking place in the United States after the George Floyd murder, in Haiti at the same time, there were a number of protests going on, and connections were being made between organizers here and organizers down there. And we'll continue to try to stay close to what's going on down there and to coordinate our actions with them. But I believe that the Haitian people are going to be courageous like they always have been. But we have to be vigilant. This state of siege that's been declared, which is just martial law, is to deter that, is to keep the Haitian people off the streets, to keep them from demanding their rights, for demanding their sovereignty, and for taking control of this political situation. And so that was put into place, and for one reason, definitely to suppress that.
Very well taken points. I definitely agree with both of what you all were saying there. And certainly, well, having brought it up once, I'll bring it up again in terms of the racism of the coverage about Haiti. And Juan, who's also with us, we were talking quite a bit about this while we were there and just the dichotomy of what we were seeing in America and what we were seeing on the ground. But the thing that to me, Jemima, that felt so important to bring back to folks here was the depth of the social consciousness of the popular movement, which is just totally written out of all stories. But, we're just picking random people out of the crowd and talking to them, and we're having great conversations, not just about imperialism, but about, the need for a different type of model for Haiti. And it was such a powerful vision that was coming from people there in the street. And it seems like that's a really important element of this.
Well, definitely. And, the racism against Haiti has been consistent, right, in terms of thinking about Haiti from the 1915 occupation, from slavery, right? The enslavement, the Haitian Revolution was represented as a barbaric revolution of these Black savages, killing whites, right? And so we still have this language of chaos. I mean, just even like your leftist news said, reported chaos in Haiti, as if it's the Haitian people creating chaos. And so part of that is, it's a consistent anti-Black, and which is global, an anti-Blackness when it comes to representing Haiti. And Haiti then becomes like, the hyper-Black representation of protest and moves for self-determination. And so we know this, and the Haitians know this. And I think we have to, those of us who want to go beyond these stereotypes, and including, and I have to say, because I have to keep calling people out, whenever you have Western reports in Haiti, they start with the poorest country, the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere, right? As if the identity of Haitian people are the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, as opposed to the fact that it's this country that everybody wants to extract all kinds of resources, human and otherwise, minerals, oil, right? From Haiti. So part of that, we have to understand how global white supremacy works when it comes to Black and brown countries, right? And then their lives are seen as expendable. And then that is used as well, right? Haitians are treated as children, as Black savages that need to be rescued. And that language, it might not be specific, but all the other language, the NGOs, the international NGOs, the IMF, the World Bank, these white, institutions, all treat Haiti in that way. And we have to understand that treatment, the view of Haiti is very much part of the way that they understand Haiti, the way that they approach Haiti, and also the history of Haiti, which actually brought fear into white supremacy in 1804. Let's be real. And so that's the reality. And I think, and Haitians know this. And they will always know it, even when people try to deny their own sense of their own, try to deny how much they know about themselves and their history and their position in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, it really is, even when just being there, even for a brief amount of time, it just like hits you in the face how just absurd these representations are. But they are so, I remember the New York Times puts out this article when we're there, and it was unbelievable. The only Haitian interviewed was Jovenel. And the other people were all white Americans. And even, I won't say the person's name, one of the people who was quoted is someone who I actually know. And, I appreciated their commentary, but I'm thinking, what are you doing? I mean, and it's bylined Port-au-Prince. So I'm like, you here? I'm here. And you said you can't find one person who's not Jovenel who can speak on this. And just the fact that this is the so-called newspaper of record in the United States, Rania, we've been talking all show about the impact of media. Well, there you go.
Yeah, no, Haiti is not, I wouldn't call it a poor country. It's an overexploited country that's clearly a very rich country. It just hasn't been allowed to benefit from its own wealth because it's just been extracted and pulled out, whether that's labor or whether that's material wealth. I mean, it's really stunning to hear what you just said, though, about the New York Times while you were there. Eugene, I remember when you were in Haiti, and I didn't see any other outlets on the ground. I think I saw like one very mediocre and not very well done Vice documentary, which is to be expected.
We actually heard, we went to some of the places that Vice went, and people were telling us like, oh yeah, we saw that Vice news, because they came in and they told people like, yeah, we're gonna tell your story and we're gonna do this, that, and the third. And then it's just this ridiculous, sensational piece that put the popular movement essentially on the same footing as Jovenel and the same footing as the gangs. And, you know, and in a way, it just shows how just absurd these reports are, because it's almost like they didn't expect Haitians to see it. Like, we're just going to tell all these lies and no one will ever know because only Americans watch Vice. But yeah, I will say, to their credit, Al Jazeera was the only outlet I saw that seemed to be like on the ground. I think their coverage has been so-so, but I at least saw them out places. But many media that week we were there, that was byline Port-au-Prince, they were reporting from the hotel. I don't care what anyone says. We didn't see them anywhere. They're reporting from the hotel.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to media coverage of these places, it's also such an interesting juxtaposition, because like 3 right-wingers will hold a protest in Venezuela and every single American media outlet puts their camera on those 3 people and makes a really big deal. And oh my God, they're repressed. It just shows you what an arm of the State Department most of these Western media outlets are, because in the case of Haiti, you had these massive protests, but they happen to be against a US-backed right-wing neoliberal regime. And whenever that's the case, you know, it's just not important, whether it's in Colombia, whether it's in Haiti. But then when it's in Venezuela and it's a bunch of right-wingers burning down like medical clinics, or if it's in Nicaragua or whatever the case may be, I mean, it's the exact polar opposite. So, and I think that's a perfect note to say, like, this is one reason why Breakthrough News exists. And I'm really proud to be a part of Breakthrough News because you were able to be there. And I'm glad that we can have this panel, because just watching the discussions about Haiti, it's everybody becomes an expert overnight. Everybody. But the New York Times and the Washington Post and all these other smaller outlets, they're all suddenly experts on Haiti when there's an assassination that happens and it's in the news. But in a few days, it's going to be out of the news and no one's going to be talking about it anymore. And in those in-between moments, no one understands the context of what's happening and how we got here.
Well, I think it speaks so much to what you were saying, Chris, which is that we have the responsibility then to raise these issues up and to put them in front of people.
Definitely.
You know, one of the things
and I think,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just really quickly wanted to shout out someone in the super chat threw in some money. And once again, those who are watching, if you're in the chat, you can throw in money in the super chat and we'll read your comment on air. I don't even know how to pronounce this person's name, so it's not a name. It's literally Rathwaite Bone Spurs Quackerbush.
Well, shout out to you.
He says, he or she or they says, Haiti is used as a testing ground for American imperialism. Haitian citizens are always on the losing end, except, of course, for the elites. Couldn't agree more with that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Eugene, I'm sorry, I didn't want to.
No, it's fine. It's important. Shout out to our super chat. Shout out to everyone who's watching. Thank you for watching and for sharing this, because it is important that people know. You know, another issue that I wanted to raise, Jemima, and this is, you know, one that I think has been maybe miscovered, but that is the security situation. And I mean, obviously, I think people are hearing a lot about the government now. You know, the issue of the gangs has also been an issue. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of the relationship of forces on the ground in terms of, you know, I guess the various armed forces that are at play.
Right. That's a very difficult thing to talk about because there's so many different elements. There are gangs that are supported. And we have to say there's a history of the light-skinned elite in Haiti arming young, you know, unemployed men to go do their bidding, right? And so you have the history of that. But you also have, over the past year or so, just an increasing number of weapons being handed out to young people all over. And you have to ask yourself, when you see these young boys, with these huge machine guns, all the ammunition in a poor country, right? Where these guns are coming from? And we have to think, well, they come, you know, there are these stories that show up in the news. It's like that CIA Coke boat that just disappeared from the news. That was a boat full of Coke. Not CIA, it was like a bank that had coke. But my point is like these guns being found at these ports, and these ports are privately owned by the elite families, right? And so you wonder how they get into the country because there's an arms embargo in Haiti, So we have to think about, well, who's funding the gangs? So some of them are linked to it, some of them are linked to the bourgeoisie, and we don't know. And the situation on the ground is very flexible. And especially now you have shifting alliances and so on. So it's just very difficult to really grasp who's with whom, who isn't, especially when alliances are shifting. And so we've been trying at the Black Alliance for Peace to really be careful in making pronouncements about these specific groups and gangs on the ground, except to say that we have to figure out who's funding them, where they're getting the money, and why it is that these young men are being given these crazy weapons to go and massacre one another. So it's an explosive situation. It's changing by the day, and I think we just need to really keep in mind, keep an eye out for what's going to happen, but also we keep an eye out on what it is that the U.S., the international community really allows under its watch. And we know that the other thing I'm worried about is, that Closer Jeff just had a press conference asking the international community for help in dealing with the gang problem. And that already tells you, if we think about, if we talk about linkages between what's going on in the U.S. and Haiti, is just thinking about, like the gang war, the police going after the gangs in like LA and stuff like that, and what that means in terms of like regular life for folks, and what's going to happen to regular Haitians on the ground when it's going to be a militarized response. And so he's already asking for this foreign help to deal with the gangs. And so that's our position, is to actually be concerned about that part of it. That's not to diminish the brutality of the violence that's been happening. But we also think the violence is really linked to these very specific parties, people with power, using these young men who are unemployed for their own gain.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really, when you see all these American-made weapons, weapons that aren't even easy to get in the U.S., which, you could get a gun on every corner, it really does raise a lot of questions about what's going on. And I think ties so much to the earlier point you were making about how chaos and all these other things are thrown out there as if it's just congenital and it's just randomly happening. And how could this is just violent, random all over the place when nowhere on earth.
People are so violent, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you think it's some of the people who are considered authorities. I mean, to see Yvonne Duque talking about, we got to do something about the violence in Haiti. You got the most violent country in the Americas. Y'all are steady killing people, the most brutal police. But it does sort of speak, I think, to who this so-called government is, which is, if you look to the Yvonne Duques of the world for your security policy, no surprise. Our friend Braithwaite, who gave us another $10, was hoping to hear about the Clinton Foundation's atrocities in Haiti. We'll be here for another 30 years. I don't know, Jemima, if you do want to speak to that, though, because it is very, very notable, the role that the Clintons have played.
Yes, I do want, and I don't know, Chris, if you want, jump in if you want, but I do want to say, I do blame Hillary Clinton directly and the Obama administration for what's happened in Haiti for the past decade, because it was Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State that left the Middle East during the Arab Spring and flew to Haiti and forced the Electoral Commission and the people there to accept Michel Martelly as the run-in candidate when he did not even make the first round of the elections. So it was Hillary Clinton and Obama that foisted this new party, the PHTK, upon the Haitian people and forced these elections. And this is why we are where we are today. And it was also Bill Clinton who was was part of the recovery mission and who created all kinds of corruption, in dealing with the elite in Haiti, gave them all this money to build hotels and raise their wealth on the backs of poor Haitians. And so, yes, the Clinton Foundation are corrupt and really, these, for me, I think are war criminals. And I think the US government, these presidents are very much should be at the ICC for what they have done to Haitian people, at least in the last 17 years, but especially in the last decade. So that's what I have to say about Bill and Hillary Clinton, because I am so upset. I know this is live and I need to keep my mouth shut because there's so much I can say about those two, but also about Obama, right? Which is because this is Obama's gift to Haiti. This Tet Calais party that has been completely, terrorizing the people for the past 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Chris, your thoughts on the same issue?
Exactly. This latest batch of neo-colonial rulers was given to us by Hillary and Bill Clinton. They're primarily responsible for Martelly, and by extension, Martelly handpicked Jovenel Moïse, and now we have Claude Joseph. So this current situation that the people of Haiti are suffering under is due to U.S. foreign policy directly, and we can see the direct connections, like Jemima mentioned.
I mean, it really is the level of complicity of the U.S. on so many different levels. It's in many ways it is known. Maybe to some it's obvious, but I feel the Clintons and others masquerading as these humanitarian figures. I mean, I was thinking that the whole time I was there, and we were only there for 8 days, but even in that time, of all the commercials I was seeing late at night in 2010 in the wake of the earthquake, give money to this person, give money to that person, we're gonna go to Haiti, we're gonna help Haiti, and I'm just like, whatever happened to that money? What did they ever do with that? I mean, it's obvious that it didn't get to the people on the ground. I mean, it really is just a travesty on every level. Well, I want to say thanks to both of you. I really appreciate you giving us our time. Also, really want to shout out Black Alliance for Peace, and definitely check out at Blacks for Peace on Twitter. I'm only on Twitter, social media, but a lot of great resources that Black Alliance for Peace is putting out and has put out to help people understand what's really going on there. But Chris, Jemima, really appreciate y'all joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rania, real quick, I just want to shout out Next Up and I'm Free, who also sent some money in the super chat there. But, before we move on, I think it is just such a commentary on so many things, what's happening in Haiti, imperialism, capitalism.
I have to say, there's a certain level of, it's like you're almost have to be impressed with how many different places in the world the U.S. is able to meddle simultaneously. I was just thinking about this. I saw the U.S. ambassadors to Lebanon, along with the French ambassador to Lebanon, today went to Saudi Arabia to discuss how to save Lebanon. I see the U.S., I see Anthony Blinken talking about Xinjiang and how we have to save Xinjiang. I see the U.S. talking about what's happening in Haiti and doing and I see the U.S. in Brazil, and it's just it's everywhere. Yeah. It's everywhere. It's really incredible. That said, we have yet to do this on this show, so I think it's a good time to do this for those who are watching and who like breakthrough news, because honestly, who wouldn't? One way that you can support our reporting, the ability of somebody like Eugene to be able to go to Haiti, which he did a couple months ago, and you can go check out his reports from there and all the future reporting that we have planned. You can support our show by throwing money in the super chat. We'll read your comment, but more importantly, by becoming a patron. Go to patreon.com/breakthrough news and become a patron, because it's with support from people like you that we are able to continue doing this and to bring you excellent content from the kinds of guests that we've had on to talk about these very important issues that, to be frank, not very many people are talking about from the perspective that we're coming from.
I think that is very true. And speaking of great guests, we are supremely honored to have our next guest here, Mr. Daniel Ellsberg, known to the world, obviously, as the man behind the Pentagon Papers, which revolutionized the world then. I'll also say the author of a great book, The Doomsday Machine, Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner. Mr. Ellsberg, thank you so much for being with us here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you.
No, absolutely. Well, I want to ask you this. We're here in the 50-year anniversary of the Pentagon Papers. Looking back, do you feel as if things have improved for those who want to blow the whistle on war crimes and malfeasance, or has it gotten worse, or is it the same?
The technical change to the digital era means that an individual can put out an enormously larger volume of data than I was able to. In the age of Xerox, 7,000 pages was pushing the envelope for me. Wouldn't have been possible before that, actually. But I couldn't put out the hundreds of thousands of pages that Ed Snowden or Chelsea Manning back in 2000 pages. So in one case, it's much easier to get information out. You don't have to copy it, download it. On the other hand, their ability to trace the people who have done this is very much larger, especially given the surveillance of newsmen we've had, news people, for years now. We've just seen that with the Trump administration having investigated journalists a great deal. It's very hard for a journalist now to in good conscience, promise or guarantee anonymity to a source. In fact, they can't. It would be bad faith to do that. There's just too much surveillance of their telephone communications and their iPhone travels and everything else. So and now what's different from 50 years ago is that I was the first, or at least I always thought I was the first. Just in the last week or two, somebody's made me aware that there was an earlier case that I never heard of, amazingly, a guy named John Nickerson in 1957. So I said, well, for 50 years, I've been saying I was the first person prosecuted for leaking to the American public. I can't say that anymore. But it took another 10 years for a second case, Samuel Loring Morrison, who was, by the way, eventually pardoned by President Clinton for selective prosecution. They weren't prosecuting anybody else. And then another more than 10 years for a third case. Then Obama, who had promised the transparent administration, came in and totally went back on that promise. And he prosecuted 3 times as many as the 3 who had earlier been indicted, starting with me or starting with John Nickerson, call it 4, but of all presidents put together. So he prosecuted about 9 people, or between 8 and 10, how you count some of them, General Petraeus, for example. But Trump prosecuted 8 in his first term, and for the first time prosecuted a journalist. Now Nixon, namely Julian Assange, Nixon had in fact intended to indict Hedrick Smith and Neil Sheehan of the New York Times. Very few people know of that. It was a Boston grand jury that finally adjourned without having indicted them for reasons probably related to the government crimes that ended my trial. Same had been done on them, warrantless wiretaps. But in any case, they didn't get to indictment. Julian is the first. And if he is extradited and brought over here, prosecuted, he will probably be convicted at the lower level. And it'll be the first conviction of a journalist. It will not be the last. He'll be the first of a stream of journalists. And genuine investigative journalism of the so-called national security state, which has very little to do with national security, but it has a lot to do with imperial security or the security of the officials managing the empire. And that the investigative journalism will essentially stop. There will still be some, because there'll be people who are willing to go to prison like that. I think Neil Sheehan would have probably, James Risen, Cy Hirsch, my friend Cy Hirsch, a few others, but it won't be very many. And the sources will have dried up, and we'll be even more authoritarian than we are now.
Well, you know, I'm glad you said that the issue of the so-called security of so many of these documents. I've been reading The Best and the Brightest by David Halberstam, and I was commenting on someone about it, and I just said, I mean, I'm 35, so I know about the Pentagon Papers. I know about it. It happened, but I'm still just so shocked reading the book at how deliberately they were keeping secret things that they then went out and told the public, oh, we're going to win the war, we're going to do these other things. And they knew unequivocally it wasn't the case. And it really does feel that there's a level of criminality sometimes to this element of secrecy where people are saying it's some great secret, but in reality, they're covering up their own complicity in such a powerful way.
That's right. That's true. And in fact, to put it bluntly, under the way the Department of Justice has been applying the Espionage Act now, it is unquestionably criminal to release classified information that reveals utmost criminality. There's no limit to the criminality that might be concealed there. Nevertheless, if it's classified, that has nothing to do, and you have no ability under the Espionage Act to tell the jury why you did this or what the nature of it was or what the impact was. That's absurd. The idea that you can have a democracy and popular sovereignty when crimes can simply, which occur all the time, can simply be stamped secret and that's it. You're unaccountable. But it's not only crimes. It's lies, terrible judgments, crazy judgments that are not infrequent at all. And why do they classify everything and keep it secret? I finally figured that out because a lot of it doesn't look that incriminating at first, but you never know what's going to look bad 5 and 10 years from now. A prediction, an estimate, a policy may just look really terrible, which at the time you thought was all right. Classify it all and keep it classified. It's the dream of any bureaucrat to be unaccountable to anybody outside the system. And that's what we have.
Daniel Ellsberg. Daniel Ellsberg, it's interesting because, during the Obama administration, his Justice Department had decided that prosecuting Julian Assange was not a good idea because then they would essentially be putting journalism on trial, right? Because then they'd have to prosecute the New York Times and all these other outlets that had published essentially the same things that WikiLeaks had published. My camera's about to turn off, Eugene. I'm just warning, but I do want to. I wanted to ask a question, and I'm still going to ask it since my microphone is still working.
We can
and
hear
that
you.
is that under the Trump administration.
Oh well, now we
Trump,
lost Rob. There you go.
NSA at work, they never sleep.
Yeah.
Okay. You can still hear me or no? You
We
can't hear
can. Go
me.
ahead.
I can hear you.
Okay,
Yeah.
so my question, you can hear me. My voice is loud enough that it's like you can see me. So Trump reversed course on this position, and he prosecuted Assange, and he tried to have him extradited. And now we have a new president. We have Joe Biden, who has yet to reverse that, even though he was a part of the Obama administration. It was their Justice Department that initially decided it was a bad idea to prosecute Julian Assange. And the reason I'm saying this is because we have this clip we want to show of Antony Blinken, who was addressing a group of French reporters. And one French reporter actually asked him about Assange. And I think that his response was very revealing. So can we watch that clip?
Sur le lanceur d'alerte Julian Assange, il est toujours menacé d'extradition aux États-Unis. Il y a eu plusieurs appels ici en France et en Europe à abandonner les charges contre lui. Qu'est-ce que vous leur répondez aujourd'hui?
Difficile pour moi de m'exprimer là-dessus parce qu'il y a un dossier juridique. Il faut que je laisse faire. Donc je vais laisser faire le processus juridique. Je comprends à la fois les questions et les émotions qui entourent ce dossier, mais c'est une question sur laquelle je ne peux pas vraiment m'exprimer.
Well, by the way, was that dubbed or was that really Blinken? Very good French, as far as I could hear. What a great Secretary of State, other than on any matter of policy. I have yet to see anything encouraging from Antony Blinken, from his debacle dealing with the Chinese to anything else. But how about his boss? Yes, he was a member of the Obama administration, but I doubt that Obama had the slightest sympathy for Assange either. And certainly as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton did not. So it was his Department of Justice that just decided, look, to use this act, which it doesn't even allow a public interest defense, but in any way, to use it against a journalist is really too blatant a violation of the First Amendment, which speaks of Congress pass no law abridging freedom of the speech and freedom of the press, or religion, by the way. And, to prosecute a journalist for pursuing journalism would be inviting a Supreme Court throwing out the act altogether as unconstitutional, which they should do, and which they should have almost surely would have done back in my day if my case had gone up to the Supreme Court. No longer true, of course. The current court, they might well forget the Constitution. just as Trump did in indicting him. When Trump's DOJ indicted Assange, you can be sure, I doubt if they even bothered to tell Trump that there was a constitutional issue. I don't even know if his lawyers noticed that. But now Biden's people, I think, do know that. But Biden is the one who said in 2010 that Assange was a high-tech terrorist. Now, think about that. That's not just a little over the top. That's crazy. A terrorist for putting out information that, by the way, was not challenged as untrue and was definitely of public interest and all this. That made him a terrorist. Crazy. But has he changed? Probably not. All presidents hate leakers. And in the past, their departments of justice know enough about the Constitution to say, let's not test this one in the Supreme Court. But this one may, in the end, be tested, and we'll see whether the Supreme Court is capable of noticing that there is a First Amendment, or was.
Has the media become more obsequious, do you think? I mean, obviously the New York Times runs the op-ed commemorating the 50 years of the Pentagon by bringing a guy in to call you a criminal and say that it would have been right for them to put you in jail. And I just thought, I mean, I guess they can print whatever viewpoint they want, but it just seemed astonishing to me that this is the first editorial op-ed they have about the Pentagon Papers as someone like, yeah, Daniel Ellsberg is a criminal. So I wonder, do you feel the media is more obsequious, or is it just, I don't know, maybe it's easy when it's right in front of your face to see it?
Look, they were like that then. That hasn't changed. I didn't take that. I am interested that you notice that. You're the only person, aside from me, maybe, and I think my family noticed that on their front page on June 13th, the 50th anniversary, up at the top, this sort of crawl at the top, they advertised this particular op-ed denouncing me as having, assaulted the Constitution, something like that. A crazy statement, which I didn't take it personally because that guy has been saying that for 50 years. Back in 2006, and we're talking about, let's see, that's before Assange. In 2006, when the New York Times published belatedly after the election of 2004, information they had all ready to go before the election of 2004 with George W. Bush, the information that Bush had been lying when he said we don't listen in on any Americans without a warrant. And that was totally false. Snowden proved that with documents later. But the guy who told him that, including Thomas Tam and others, did not have documents. But the Times, James Risen, actually, had talked to a lot of people who in the government who were saying, we're doing it, and it is unconstitutional, and it is illegal. So they were all ready to go. And then what was his name? The head of the Times, managing editor, Bill Keller, takes it to the White House, which tells him, if you publish this, you'll have blood on your hands. Meaning what? The next terrorist attack will blame on you. You put this out, you did it. And that won't be good for you. So they held it for a year, and they were not about to put it out until James Risen, the guy who'd found this out, the reporter, was about to bring out a book with this in and scoop the Times. So at the last minute, they went back to his old story, put it out, got a Pulitzer Prize for it, which they earned. And Bill Keller was not impeached, or whatever the journalistic equivalent of that might be, as he should have been for holding it on. It was partly because of that Ed Snowden did not bother to give his information to the New York Times. He thought it would be sat on exactly by them. So this, which I've repressed his name. What's the name of the guy who wrote that op-ed? You just commented on it. I know it, but it's not one that I like to keep. The guy wrote the op-ed.
Oh my God! Now we all are forgetting.
I know it. I'm 90. What's your excuse? But anyway, at any rate, he wrote an article and commentary in 2006. The story came out 2005 belatedly. It's proven 8 years later by Ed Snowden. But so they get the Pulitzer Prize for 2005. In 2006, this guy, let him be nameless. Why not? Why Why reveal the guilty here? Writes an article in commentary that the Times and its reporters should be tried for Espionage Act for putting that out. Okay? So when he does it against me, that's not exactly news to me. He'd said the same thing about me many years before. But I do agree with you. It's eyebrow raising when the Times chooses that guy to write the op-ed on the 50th anniversary. What if they learned damn little?
Yes.
The Times or anybody else. The Times is very responsible for the horrible Washington reporting that enabled us to get into Vietnam and stay in Vietnam. And the same Times was much more active even with Judy Miller and others in spreading lies about Iraq. Years later, they did nothing to keep us out of Iraq. On the contrary, they helped us get in. And when it came to getting out, what have they done? Nothing in the way of it. And go back to 50 years of the Pentagon Papers. Strictly speaking, that did not end the war or shorten the war. If I and the Times had only put out the Pentagon Papers, which ended in 1968 under Johnson, they didn't go into the Nixon regime, which was what I was concerned about in 1969 when I copied them, 70, 71. If it had only been the latter stuff, the 68 stuff and before, the public showed no inclination to judge from what I was trying to put out about 4 previous presidents who had lied us into Vietnam and kept it going, that a 5th might be doing the same. That was my single motive for getting this out. If I'd had documents on Nixon, I would not have bothered with history. But I put out what I had and tried to say, look, 4 previous presidents did it. Nixon is still lying to you. He's still making threats. This war is going to go on, and it's going to get larger in the air as it did. No one believed me. And I just happened to be thinking back about it. The Times did not lift a finger once to find out what Nixon's actual policy was. He's getting us out. Yes. Now, why in retrospect did that take 6 years? Why did 20,000 more Americans have to die while he was getting us out? What were the issues? What was the disagreement between Nixon and Le Duan in Vietnam? I'll bet you, neither of you, very well informed, no answers to that. I bet you have no answer. And I'll even have to say from my experience, if you had an answer, it would probably be wrong, because I know the sources and they're wrong. The Times has never gotten that. Neil Sheehan never got it in the Times. So the Pentagon Papers by themselves, it turns out, as I just said to my wife at lunch today, talking about current situation and the Pentagon Papers, I'm saying people are unwilling to learn from past presidents about what's going on now, what questions they should be asking, what doubts they should have. We're always hearing about how can people believe all these crazy conspiracy theories? Well, one part of it is that our empire has been run conspiratorially forever, and the government is run as a conspiracy. And they lie to us about getting us into Vietnam. I'm sorry if I sound like a member of QAnon or something. No, I'm not saying they are a satanic child trafficking ring. I am saying that they have killed hundreds of thousands of children wrongly in Vietnam and Iraq and Somalia and all over the place. Wherever we're droning, we are killing children. And when people said to LBJ, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? He took that, of course, as just an intolerable insult. It was a perfectly straightforward question. How many kids did we kill today? We weren't counting them. We never have. We never have. How many kids have we killed in Iraq? See if you can find that on WikiLeaks as a government statement. Nothing. And the American people haven't asked. Okay. That's, in other words, that hasn't changed. The press hasn't changed. What did happen 50 years ago was that Nixon's domestic crimes against me, which turned out during at the end of the trial, did in fact serve to bring him down. In those days, the acts he took against me, 71, 72, 73, were then domestic crimes. Warrantless wiretaps. Give me a break. No problem now. Totally, what could be more legal? CIA involved in doing psychological profiles of me and lending their assets to incapacitate me totally. Obama set the record and let it leak out that he had killed by drone on a list Anwar al-Awlaki, an American citizen born in America, without trial, due process, nothing. And then weeks later, killed his 16-year-old son by drone. We've never really heard what happened there. And somebody told me the other day that Trump had killed his daughter, sort of finishing off the family like a typical mafia chief. So how much does the American public care about that? That has in effect legitimized assassination, including of me. And if they could get Ed Snowden, he'd be gone. So that's part of the deal now. In other words, things that were clearly criminal 50 years ago have now been legalized by the Patriot Act after 9/11, or in many other cases. In theory, torture is the most criminal thing you can find. Obama refused to prosecute anyone for it, in effect, decriminalizing. You know, the way some states decriminalized marijuana, they didn't prosecute it on the way to legalizing it. Well, torture has been decriminalized. I don't know if people have noticed that, but it would be pretty hard to bring a case against some new torturer after the last 10 years of non-prosecution. So, in short, the empire hasn't learned because the empire's doing what it wants to do. Fine, it hasn't. What's to learn? It didn't make any mistakes as far as I'm concerned. They certainly didn't pay any price for it, nobody. And it's not a matter of telling them, hey, you shouldn't be determining the regime of this other country, regime change that is not part of the USA. Now, regime change is just every day in the papers, no problem. So we're moving from being a covert empire, where we denied we were an empire and denied what we were doing to keep it, to what's something closer to an overt empire, when we just talk very openly about our right to change the government of Iran or Syria or anywhere else. So we're Haiti, Honduras. Were we involved in the assassination yesterday? I don't know. Could we have been? Of course, kind of thing we do all the time. Might we not have been? Yeah, we're not the only murderers in the world.
You know, it seems that, and I'm glad you pointed that out in terms of the empire doing what it wants to do, because, I mean, obviously there's a threat of prosecution for whistleblowers, but it seems like the other thing is you have to essentially assume your career in the civil service is just over 100% if you bring any of this out. And that, in fact, I mean, you know, not to keep representing the best and the brightest, but the thing that had kept striking me page by page is people who would be privately saying we should not be doing this, producing papers, doing that, and then going out in public saying the exact opposite, because the only way to advance your career is to advance the lie.
That's very good. Let me ask you, what are the pages you're reading? You've been reading very well. What is it you're reading?
The Best and the Brightest by David Halberstam.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. He had to, by the way, stop that for a year. It was about to come out when the Pentagon Papers came out. He had to hold it back for a year to incorporate what was to be found in the Pentagon Papers. David Halberstam's a terrific guy, but he didn't have the Pentagon Papers when he first wrote it. And the reason he had to revise it was he had thought, he really did think, that Lyndon Johnson had been misled by the military year by year, telling him that we're about to win. They never told him that. That was the theme of his book. Never. Not once did they say. Did they tell him it was unwinnable? No. People think the Pentagon Papers said that. Never. They said it is winnable if you do it our way, not your way. Your way will not win. It will only stalemate bloody. Our way will win. Johnson looked at that, and I think rightly, between those two, he chose his way, which was a bloody, escalating stalemate, because the other way will bring China in, we'll be in nuclear war with China. I think that was right. But what you're saying is not to be found in the Pentagon Papers, which is this. The government was filled with high-level people who not only thought that we're not going to win, they all thought that. In fact, everybody in Vietnam thought that with what we're doing. You could see that. We're not in the process of winning. I was there 2 years, but it didn't take 2 years for most people to realize that. Could it be won? No, these people knew it couldn't be won, not at any acceptable cost or anything. We should get out. But not one said that to Congress or the press or the public. Not one. So it's filled with people not only who knew that what they were saying to the public about progress was a lie, keeping the war going. That's all of them who spoke to the public. But they also knew that everything they were doing from day to day to pursue the war was killing people to no end. And they didn't know the Pentagon Papers that had been wrong from the start. When we were supporting the French earlier, they didn't know that history. And their boss in the State Department, Dean Rusk, said the opposite, said that Geneva, he said this privately and publicly. I heard him, he convinced me. Geneva in 1954, which ended the French War, which we had been financing 80% of, he said, that established two sovereign states, and one of them is now invading the other. That was a total hoax. It is not different from saying there is no man-made climate crisis. Oxyhydrochloroquine cures COVID. To say that Geneva established two sovereign states, passing over the fact that Geneva called for a national election in 1956 for the whole nation of Vietnam. There was not two states, there was one state, and an election in 1956, which we said no to. We supported a guy, Diem, who said he would never do that. And anyway, we were lied to. I even believed that one until I read the Pentagon Papers. So we come back to the point, if I may, it's struck more than I was before at how many people actually believed by, if not by as early as 65, by 66, 67, 68, 69, we got to get out of there. Not one of them said that to the public. Nobody. They didn't give up their careers, which, as you say, it would have meant giving up their career. No, that's out of the question. I just wrote a note to myself finally today as I'm thinking about it. These people, in not opposing publicly the wrongful policy of a president who had appointed them, that they'd worked for, were not rejecting an option. It was unthinkable. To do that, which could have saved millions of lives then, or in a nuclear situation, billions, don't count on anyone doing it. Because even if they know this is catastrophic, this is the end for humanity going in this direction. We're gambling on threatening nuclear weapons over Taiwan, for example. We're gambling with the lives of billions of people when we do that. You shouldn't expect that one single person at my rank, top civil service rank or higher, will tell us what they believe, because that would betray the president. Now, that's not unlike a fascist regime or a Stalinist communist regime or a Tojo regime or, there's other countries, a Saudi Arabian regime. How's that? Our ally, Saudi Arabia. So, no, people don't do that unless we demand of some of them that they tell us what they know, which we don't. We knew the war wasn't winning. We didn't know that people inside knew that and were pursuing it anyway. But unless they tell Congress that and tell us that, we're doomed. It's not just this country. In the nuclear era and the climate era, civilization is doomed. But it's possible that it will change.
I have one question for you, Daniel, and I think you've probably been asked this before. But I'm just curious how you respond to this notion that there's some sort of distinction between what you did, what someone like you did, and then what somebody very bad like Julian Assange did and what Chelsea Manning did. There are these people who do try to make this distinction as though there's like a difference because they want to justify the treatment of Julian Assange and the treatment of Chelsea Manning while also still saying, oh, but the Pentagon Papers were different. So how do you respond to that commentary?
Well, I think you know how I've been responding to that for more than a decade. Since
I do, but I want to hear it again.
With Chelsea Manning since 2010, I'm saying there is no difference in motivation from what she did. He was then Bradley Manning. What she did and what I did. Motives were the same. And to stop unjustified killing, homicide, murder, in her case, torture, which I didn't know as much about at the time. She revealed a lot of torture by us. And no difference there. And it's silly to say that there is. Of course, we're different in personalities and background and so forth. I'm very impressed that people as young as Chelsea Manning then was, or Ed Snowden was then compared to me, did see the light much earlier than I did and acted earlier than I did. But in terms of the action, there's no difference. 3 years later, 8 years ago, Ed Snowden saying the same. So as you say, it's just people who want to justify their condemnation of Chelsea Manning or Ed Snowden, but don't want to say, I'm against all whistleblowing. So they turn to say, well, Ellsberg, in 50 years, no harm has been ever presented that my revelations had, only if anything. I'm saying not much benefit either. What did help was Nixon's crimes against me in a very reasonable belief that I might be able to prove what I was saying about his threats of nuclear weapons and his escalation. Very reasonable to him because people who not only worked for him but resigned from him might have taken documents, but they hadn't. As one of them, Roger Moore, said to me with an admission that such as I've never heard from anybody else. He said, we should have thrown open the safe and screamed bloody murder because that's exactly what it was. And that's true. But I haven't heard anybody else in the 50 years say that. But it's true of everyone who served with me. Everyone who served with me. It was their duty, I should say, except the ones who blindly believed in the cause to the end. Okay, not them. That wasn't very many. Dean Rusk, maybe Elrich himself, Walt Rostow. These are names you don't remember from the distant past. But they managed to believe in this from nobody else. But they dropped 4 times the tonnage of World War II without believing that what they were doing was doing anybody any good, except maybe keeping them in office, which it didn't do. LBJ lost office, as he was warned by Hubert Humphrey, but he was not called a loser. And that was worth the lives of several million Vietnamese, that Lyndon Johnson did not go to his grave ever having been called weak or a loser. And that's enough to keep any war going. Any war going. I don't know a leader of any kind who's been willing to stop a war saying it's not going anywhere. In fact, it was wrong from the start. No more lives should be lost. As Senator Gravel, who just died, and who was the single person in Congress who had the guts to read the Pentagon Papers in a subcommittee. Go back to one of your questions. I asked him in 2007 after the election. I said, Mike, are the current Democrats extraordinarily cowardly as they look? And he said, no, ordinarily cowardly, same as before. And that hasn't happened. But now look in history and think of somebody, every war has had at least one side where it's reasonable, where everybody else in the world can see that was a mistake, at least to prolong it and probably to stop it, to start it. But even if it was in some sense reasonable to start it, to keep it going, I'm talking now about World War I, the Civil War, the South, say, for example, and others. It so happens, I know I'm going on here, but it just so happens that I picked a book off my shelf by Albert Speer, the number 3 man of the Nazi regime, who spent 20 years in Spandau prison. Only 20 years, because the others were executed. He was the only one who admitted fault, wrong. He said, I deserve the same sentence as the others. And they gave him credit for that, for saying it, but gave him only 20 years. But he said that he felt he was as guilty for what he didn't do, but didn't oppose, as any of them were for the worst things they did too. Now, not one, I'm sorry, what really got me was I was reading the last chapters. The last days of Hitler, the last months of Hitler, February, the war ended in May 8th. In February, everybody around Hitler, with 3 exceptions, you won't know the names, but Jodl, Ley, and Bormann. There were 4 with Adolf Hitler who believed maybe something will turn up, maybe we can pull this off. And we should keep going. All the others believed catastrophe. The country is being destroyed. Not one was willing to oppose Hitler at that point, to say hello, let alone to say to the world. And I was thinking, that's not different from Vietnam or Iraq. I've never heard of one brigadier general or higher in the active army who believed it was a good idea to invade Iraq. I've asked a lot of people, none, but it got done. And we see the effects, but we don't see much of the effects because the deaths have not been counted or told to us at all. So I look over history as a whole and I say, if you look at every war, at least one set of leaders should be saying, this got to stop, this should stop, this isn't going anywhere. That didn't happen in the Confederacy or anywhere else. Anywhere. The Germans, I'm saying, being absolutely smashed in World War II. And they knew it. And they couldn't bring themselves to disobey the boss at that point. And all the other failures in history. So we look at Vietnam. It didn't come down because of any executive leader. And Afghanistan. Now, by the way, we may actually be getting out of Afghanistan. It seems like, in fact, they announced it the other day. I've been watching to see how much bombing we're going to continue to do. And if we do, it won't make it that much difference to the Afghans if we continue to bomb the way we've been doing, and drones and all that. But it might, he might stop it. It's not impossible yet.
You know, Daniel Ellsberg,
I just said, I don't know anybody else who stopped a war like that.
I'm glad you brought up Afghanistan because I wanted to ask you, does the debate around Afghanistan that we're hearing right now remind you of the debate around leaving Vietnam? And I ask this also because, the ex-National Security Advisor, General McMaster, today he actually blamed the media for helping to lose the war in Afghanistan. So I'm curious your thoughts on the parallels between the retreats from these two countries and his blame of the media in particular.
You've staggered me here for a minute because I have very mixed feelings about McMaster, but I can't even grasp what he's saying when he says the media lost Afghanistan. After all, when the Washington Post brought out, was it 2 years ago now, the Afghan Papers, analogizing them to the Pentagon Papers. Actually, the Pentagon Papers are highest level staff papers and decisions, higher level, top secret. These were, I think, secret, and they were sort of middle level. Still worth hearing, absolutely. Very, very experienced. Okay, so they showed that the Afghan people knew that what everybody was being said about progress was a lie. Did the media expose that? I don't remember that. I don't even remember they're getting interviews with these people, these same people. They didn't talk to the press. The press didn't go after them. So we all learned to our surprise, oh, they all saw it at the time, just like Vietnam. And just, I think we can assume like Russians in Afghanistan, or British in Afghanistan, or Chinese in Afghanistan, or Mongols, or Alexander's people. Afghanistan gave each of those dictators the hardest time they ever had in an empire, or threw them out, like the British, killing almost everybody. That was not a smart war for Obama to decide to go into. He said he was against the dumb war in Iraq. So Afghanistan is where we're going to go into. The dumbest place on the planet to try to occupy. You have 2,000 years of evidence that these people who are very tribal, as I understand it, and who in general don't combine with the people in the next valley, except on one issue, to throw out foreign invaders, which they do very effectively. And they've done, as I say, over and over again. Which one learned the lessons of their predecessors? Oh, that's them. We'll do it. Why were we going to win in Afghanistan when the Russians hadn't? They didn't have any media problem. They didn't have any draft problem. They didn't have any people in the streets in an anti-war movement. So some people thought at the time, the Russians are going to show us how to do it. And I thought, no, I don't think so. That's not the critical element here, fighting these guerrillas who've been doing this for 2,000 years and so forth. I think the Russians are going to have a bad time there. And that turned out to be the case. How many Russians knew that? Probably most of them. And did they tell it? Well, not at first, but a lot of this was under Gorbachev, under relative freedom, press freedom. You didn't see this. I don't know if they'll admit even now just how badly they behave. There have been a few just recently. Okay, now we come to us. Big element here. Yes, we kept the war going for humanitarian interests to avoid a Catholic bloodbath in Vietnam. 10% of the population Catholic. So there's all this talk about there's going to be a Catholic bloodbath. Well, that's a pretty good talking point for keeping the war going in the United States of America. It actually did not give us a right to be killing, and there was another solution to that problem, which we only slightly observed. Get the Catholics and the people who worked with us out of Vietnam before we lose it. And I knew a number of them. They were the people I worked with. I didn't work with the Viet Cong. I worked with the government of Vietnam, mostly Catholics they hadn't been Catholics when they were born, but to get ahead, to be an officer, to be in the Continental Party, you had to convert. Okay, yes, we did owe it to them. And we had an imperial responsibility when we lost to get those people out. And we only did a fraction of it. It was terrible for we do it. Are we doing differently now? Biden has said he would get out the people who have collaborated with us. And I read yesterday in the Times that process is stalled. Getting the people who are our interpreters, this and that. How about the larger people who are endangered there, the women, especially in Kabul or the cities? Women outside the main cities have not benefited much from our being there. But in Kabul, they have, as they did under the Russians. That was one reason there was an insurgency. The Russians were suppressing the dope trade and liberating women. The warlords stand up with a lot of support and work to kick the Russians out, which they can't do exactly. They can only stalemate them. So eventually, Gorbachev did get out. We're getting out of Afghanistan, it looks like. Now, a lot of women are in trouble then who are in universities in Kabul. It's not in the countryside. The warlords who are going to be fighting it out from now on are as bad against women as the Taliban. And they are worse, and I won't go into this in detail, against young boys than the Taliban. They have a particular oppression, as we would see it, of young boys. So there's going to be a lot of trouble there, which we will not fix by bombing people. Or we haven't done it in 20 years and we won't do it. What about the women there? I say, let them out. Let them out. before we lose all the air travel on there, what, every woman? No, not every woman wants to come out. But after 20 years, I think we could afford to give a place to live to a lot of women, educated women especially, who will be oppressed in particular. I'm not singling them out, but the Taliban will single them out. So ones that are especially a threat to the Taliban. I saw, by the way, a picture today of armed women. Well, they admitted themselves against the Taliban. They admitted themselves as kind of symbolic. I hope it doesn't go too far. Arms are not, we didn't defeat the Taliban, and those women are not going to defeat the Taliban with violence. With a nonviolent movement over time, I believe a lot can be done. It could have been done and can still be done in Palestine, but not without the cost of lives, people willing to give their lives. But I think a nonviolent struggle in Palestine and Israel would have had much better prospect than what's actually happened. And that's a belief of mine that I've had for 50 years, and I find it more and more confirmed now. I'm not sure of it. Maybe I'm wrong. Are those women justified in picking up rockets and so forth, as in the picture? Sure, by the standards of the world, who's more justified? They're fighting for their own freedom. Absolutely. Will that be the best way for them to do it? I sincerely doubt it, and I care about that. But I come back to one responsibility we have, not to keep bombing Afghan children and women and wedding parties and everything else for the benefit of women in Kabul. Bring the women out of Kabul if you have to, and certainly the ones who have worked with us. And if that's not happening, it's one further shame of us. There's honor among thieves, supposedly. Is there honor among empires? Well, the French were proud of themselves for getting most of their collaborators out. We didn't, and we should now.
Daniel Ellsberg, I have to say we were very, very honored to have you here on the Freedom Side. Really appreciate you giving us some time here and sharing everything that you have shared with us. And we really, again, just appreciate you joining us this evening.
Thank you. Great.
Absolutely. Well, Rania, I think that brings us to, well, where it always brings us to, the end of the show, as it were. Just a reminder, you can go to patreon.com/breakthroughnews. If you want to make a donation, become a patron, help us out there. Please, Rania, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to apologize for looking so different from the beginning of the show. With my camera troubles, I had to switch cameras. But the lighting is still the same as the old camera, so I'm orange now.
Well, I appreciate. You know what? I appreciate your transparency. I wasn't going to say anything. I wasn't going to ask any questions. But thank you for
You're just going to let me slide in. You're just going to let me slide in and pretend like nothing changed.
Hey, listen. If you don't say it, maybe it never happened. But nevertheless, as always, it was a pleasure being with you and doing this show. Big thanks to all our guests. Big shout out to everybody who has watched, who has shared. Don't forget to go to YouTube. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you can get the alerts. Don't forget to like it as well. And of course, you can follow us at BT Newsroom across all your social media platforms. And we will be back with you again next week.
Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way.